Lilith and the other vampires continued pestering Kuno about her supposed fate as the savior of the vampire race. Lilith completely denied any of this, stating that she was just a normal, ordinary human who wants to be a ninja like her good old friend Fudge. So, even though the vampires were completely offering their undying loyalty to her, she just wouldn't take it. But of course, there was someone there who was more than willing to accept it. "Hey, Kuno, let me talk to you for a bit," Fudge said, whispering in her ears. "You should let them serve you." "Huh? Why should I do that? Doesn't the ninja code say that we should be a lone wolf?" Fudge shook his head. "Yes, but think of what they could do to the Iron Maiden religion. With their help, we can spread the word of this great goddess to the rest of the world." After Fudge's inspiring words, Kuno started considering the proposition. She didn't know why, but she wanted the Iron Maiden religion to be worshipped by more and more people in the future. "Okay. Lilith?" "Yes, original vampire?" Lilith asked, kneeling. "Are you willing for us to be your servants?" "Yes," Kuno answered, "as long as you help us with the Iron Maiden religion." Lilith nodded. "I was a skeptic of the Iron Maiden religion before, but now, given that it has led me to our progenitor, then I can only believe that the goddess Gaia herself has given her express authority for this religion. Trust that I will be a loyal servant to you and the Iron Maiden religion." Watching this, Michael couldn't help but be jealous. Lilith was the equivalent of a ninth-stage body formation magnetic like the Legacies. And now, she was a loyal servant to the Iron Maiden religion, basically giving it the strength of a major faction company. Speaking of ninth-stage body formation, while everyone was busy with Lilith, he turned his attention towards the robed figures lying on the ground. He raised his hand and closed his eyes, focusing on nothing but the God-forged pieces in his heart. And suddenly, the bodies of the robed figures suddenly twitched, with others mistaking it for a sign of life. But in truth, it was due to the small metallic droplets of God-forge that were exiting out of their very skin. God-forge pieces were perspirated out of their chest, slowly floating off of their bodies and moving closer and closer towards Michael. Lilith and the other vampires turned silent as they witnessed this scene. As a royal blood vampire, she was more knowledgeable about human cultivation than any other. And she knew that this scene was more than unusual. It was impossible. The droplets of Godforge pieces rotated in the air, forming a galaxy-like cluster around Michael. Each of these drops were accompanied by a white flame of unity, which made the whole scene even more spectacular. Those closest to Michael spun faster than the rest, as if he was a giant black hole that warped the very space and time around the Godforge pieces. As soon as it got within an inch of his skin, it shot towards his chest at an instantaneous speed, making it seem like it disappeared out of nowhere. More and more drops got absorbed into his body, all flowing through his internal organs before it reached his heart and covered its surface with Godforge. The galaxy of drops soon turned into a vortex that pulled everything closer to Michael, even affecting the normal world around him. Everyone felt the gusts of wind in their faces as the drops whizzed by their faces. They felt the vibrations in the ground as a subtle but ever-present surge of ability power emanated out of Michael. And as the last drops of Godforge integrated itself into his heart, a sonic boom exploded out of his body, followed by the psychic sounds of glass shattering. They just witnessed Michael breaking through to the 6th stage of body formation. Michael looked at his hands, once again surprised at the strength he now held. He thought he was already strong after breaking through to the 5th stage, evidenced by his easy dismantling of the robed figures and the vampires who fought him. But now, he felt like he had reached another level of power that was indescribable. His growth wasn't linear. It was exponential. Amazing. I didn't know breaking through could feel so good. Cuckoo, that's right, Michael. Now doesn't this feel good? Doesn't this feel easy? Harbinger asked, his voice echoing beside his ear like a literal devil. Michael would be lying if he said he didn't consider the thought. He had been stuck in the 4th stage for what seemed like forever, and he was only able to advance to the 5th stage when he obtained enough Godforge pieces in the Red Ravine, and even that required a lot of luck and perseverance. He always thought he'd have much more trouble advancing through to the next stages. After all, he required 3 times more than the normal magnetic. That was 3 times the effort or 3 times the cost. But after just one fight against these robed figures, he advanced through to the next stage like it was nothing. Truth be told, it felt kind of addicting. For him to advance to the next stage, then all he needed to do was to fight 3 7th-stage magnetics and steal their Godforge pieces. He could also do it with 4 6th stages or 5 5th stages. So what do you say? Are you in the mood to become a vigilante? We strike at night, defeating only those who pose evil in the world. And as their punishment for their heinous crimes, we take their Godforge pieces and use it to strengthen ourselves and become even more unstoppable. Michael was really tempted to become a comic book hero come to life. However, that still felt a little bit edgy. He didn't want to seek out bad guys and wait for them to commit a crime just so that he could have an excuse to steal their Godforge pieces. Now, if trouble did find him, then he was more than willing to accept their Godforge charity for a greater cause. Maybe I should put myself out there more so that bad guys will want to fight me more often. Cuckoo. Now we're talking. Human, I see now why the original vampire has graced you with her presence. Lilith praised. Your immense power and your strange attraction to these Godforge pieces, it seems that you are no mere ordinary human after all. It must be because you are a chosen of the goddess Gaia. Michael immediately raised his hand to stop the misunderstanding, but Fudge got ahead of him first. Yes, Fudge exclaimed. She has given her his blessing by showing herself to Master. Would you like to know more about the history of the Iron Maiden? Lilith's eyes widened. Is this true? Guillermo nodded. That is what I have been trying to tell the others. The Iron Maiden is the true religion we have all been seeking. Gaia is the Iron Maiden. Soon after, Michael transported everyone back to the nation of Reborn. Lilith was once again surprised at his ability, but simply just reasoned it to the fact that he was the chosen of Gaia. Once they were there, all the vampires were taken to the Church of the Iron Maiden, where they were warmly welcomed by its loyal believers, the vampires who were already there and some humans and demi-humans who started to believe in the religion. Amazing! You have done a great job, Lilith praised as she ran her hands through the mural on the wall depicting the first creation of the vampires. Progenitor, does this not feel familiar? Kuno shook her head. Please call me Kuno. That's my name. As you please, Progenitor Kuno. Hestu and Viperion then came out of their rooms wearing a robe made out of a metal-like fabric reminiscent of stainless steel. Then they gave a tour of the whole church to the vampires. This place is more than adequate for now, Lilith said. But we are going to need a lot more space to accommodate the vampiric race. All of them? Michael asked her. Yes, we must build more churches. A lot bigger than this one, reaching through the far corners of the world. Hey, I like the sound of that, Fudge muttered. We must spread the Iron Maiden religion to the rest of the world, Lilith said with urgency in her tone. I still couldn't believe that I was almost led astray by those humans. Those robed figures would have had the vampires wrapped around their fingers if Michael wasn't there to intervene. The fact that they had a blood crystal artifact meant that they could make any vampire believe in their words, therefore easily tricking them to do their bidding. Lilith almost fought Michael, a chosen of the goddess. If something happened to him, it would have been a crime worthy of a punishment worse than death. Do you know who they were? He asked Lilith. They presented themselves as a group of people wanting to form a bond with us vampires. They sought me first, as they knew that my status as a royal blood will allow them to much more easily control the vampire populace. Why? Michael asked. She looked at Michael. Do you not know about New Sparta? As soon as Fudge heard those words, he suddenly jumped up. Oh, the Master, I forgot to tell you something. It seemed that while he was busy with his Darkwood farm, there were major developments in Metropolis that he wasn't aware of. He was completely clueless about everything. New Sparta. Lilith nodded. We were approached by the Draconians, asking us to partake in their new region. They intended to gather all beastfolks in one place so that instead of us having to visit humans, they in turn would have to visit us. The other royal bloods have accepted their invitation, taking with them the majority of the other vampires. I was the only one who refused, as I thought that staying in one place would do us no good in our search for our goddess. Michael stayed silent as he processed the information. ChatJK5, what do you think? It seems that the Draconians wish for entertainment. Entertainment? Yes. By straying off the path towards Metropolis, the Draconians are giving a chance for other territories to take the spotlight. They are issuing a challenging Metropolis and the other human civilizations. Entertain me. By earning the Draconians' attention, one would have the possibility of earning millions of sand dollars circulating in their economy. If I were in other people's shoes, I would most certainly want to enter New Sparta as fast as possible. Even though ChatJK5 explained it really well, he still didn't get the motive behind this move. The most probable answer would be that it is purely for entertainment value. Really? Due to their natural strength and dominance over all the other species, Draconians have a tendency of being unpredictable. They easily feel bored and want to satiate that boredom with excitement by creating chaos whenever possible. Michael didn't believe that all of this was purely just to relieve the Draconians' boredom. But regardless of their motivation, it was clear that they commanded the respect and authority of the other beast folks. From this moment forward, all the other tourists would be funneling towards New Sparta, rather than Metropolis or any other territory. This disrupted his plans. However, this was also an opportunity too. Good to pass up. Fudge seemed to have picked up on his thoughts after seeing his facial expressions. Master, do you want to go to New Sparta? You read my mind, Michael replied. Would it be possible to just go there? Fudge nodded. Master, Alaric, and the other major factions have already arranged for everything. Those from different territories and cities will have their own regions in New Sparta. And Alaric has already dedicated a space for the Reborn company. It seems that the others already had a head start ahead of him. Most of the companies had probably already finished their setup in New Sparta. Lilith, can you help me in New Sparta? I'm planning on going there. Lilith nodded. Of course. It is imperative that I tell our brethren that we have found our goddess and our progenitor. The fact that he had a royal blood vampire with him would certainly help him in establishing the Reborn company there. Fudge, tell me everything there is to know about New Sparta. Here's what I found out, Master. Fudge then began giving him the spiel about what Alaric and the others talked about in the meeting while he was gone. It seemed that this New Sparta wouldn't be like a city or a formal territory. Since it was just recently made, everything was made out of wooden barracks or simple stone buildings. But even though everything would be made easy, it seemed that most humans weren't allowed to create their own territories. New Sparta was meant for beast folks, which meant that humans would only have a fraction of the territory dedicated to themselves. If they wanted to build a store or a restaurant, then they would have to have the express permission of the beast folks living in those regions. But of course, since there would be a lot of people aiming to get those spots, things would eventually turn into a competition of sorts on whoever could get the beast folks' attention the most. New Sparta wasn't going to be a new city for humans to conquer. They were mere guests for the beast folks, acting as merchant travelers to give them their needs and their wants, all for those coveted sand dollars that they all possessed. Of course, most of these companies were starting from scratch. They would have to build their trust within the beast folk community. But Michael had a head start. He already had connections within 2 of the 5 beast folks visiting the royal continent. Lilith and the other vampires were one of them. As long as he could prove that the Iron Maiden religion was the true one they'd been searching for, then he had a safe bet in establishing relations with them. And since he'd be bringing with him a bona fide royal blood vampire, then his job of convincing them was a lot easier. As for the mermen, he wasn't that sure yet. All of Reed's connections were already in the nation of Reborn, meaning that it was more than probable that the mermen in New Sparta had no idea about his roller coaster. He immediately went over to Reed, Serena, and the other mermaids to get their opinions. As usual, he found them having a picnic near the Merman theme park, with Nixie and the Duchess grandchildren having a merry time riding through the roller coaster. "Are you here to buy some more Sue drops?" Serena asked him. He shook his head. Then, he told them everything he knew about New Sparta. I have been hearing rumblings of mermen planning something big, Reed said, rubbing his chin. That's weird, Serena muttered. I have never heard of any of this. How are they able to change plans without my express consent? Serena was a princess, not only that, but she was the one in charge of everything the mermen did in the surface world. A big change like this should have definitely been through to her, yet, she heard not even a single peep. How is this possible? Reed raised his head, realizing something. Serena, I think your sister's there. As soon as he mentioned the word sister, Serena finally put the last piece of the puzzle. So that's why. The only way that those mermen could do whatever they wanted without permission from someone like Serena was if they were being led by someone with a lineage connected to the Ocean King himself. I wonder who it is, Serena pondered. Is it 50th sister? The Ocean King made it a point to spread his genes quite liberally, which led to Serena having a lot of sisters. So you think that the mermen are being led by your sister? Michael asked. Sisters, probably, she replied. We have no way of knowing unless we go there. Having Serena accompany him to New Sparta was definitely welcome. How about you, Reed? I'll catch up with you a little while later, he replied. I still need to take care of my little Nixie. Although Nixie had improved tremendously well, to the point where she was acting more and more like a normal child each day, Reed still made it a point to watch over her like a hawk in case her curse acted up. Juniper already assured Reed that her life was no longer in any danger. However, a parent's worries always triumphed even that of the second-best doctor in the whole world. He was the very definition of a helicopter father. All right, we'll see you there, he said to Reed before teleporting away back into his own room. Once he was alone, he checked up on the darkwood plant in the isolated space and found it to be growing as expected. Its stems were getting thicker, and more leaves were sprouting out of the ground. This was a good sign that his farm was working. In the experiment books, the first few days were always the hardest, and it was when most of their darkwood plants would wither and die. But thanks to the sensors he put in place, any time that the temperature, wind, or light would change, then it would quickly work and turn it to the optimal growing zone. I wonder what the elves are going to think. Speaking of which, are Farron and the elves going to be in New Sparta? Well, they promised they'd be going to Metropolis in a month, but he didn't know if they were also a part of the group that changed their plans. It would be great if they were. He already established a friendly relationship with them through their little interaction a few days ago, so if he was able to get them on their side, then he'd have connections with 3 of the 5 beast folks in New Sparta. I definitely need Shiina to accompany me. Maybe they'd treat Reborn better if they found out that the chosen one of their race was with me. Without further ado, he started piloting his drone towards New Sparta. He'd be going there by himself first, and once he got his bearings, then he would teleport other people with him for help. Traveling through the endless lands for hours on end, he finally saw a glimpse of New Sparta in the distance. He looked through the monitor in the control room, and ChatJK5 conveniently made a map of the entire region based on what he could see. New Sparta is about the same size as Angora City, with most of the architecture being made out of nothing but wood and stone. The map showed him a circular region divided into 5 distinct parts. There were 4 quadrants on the outer side, surrounding a smaller circular region in the middle. So these quadrants represent the regions for the beast folks, right? Each of the quadrants showed distinct differences in architecture. One of them was Gothic in style, using sharp black rocks that towered through the skies like a spire. This must have been the quadrant reserved for the vampires. One of them was distinctly blue in color, with a giant lake in the middle. And with an overhead view, he saw structures underneath the water, with the coral roofs just barely peeking out of the water. This was for the mermen. The upper right quadrant was made out of an entire forest of tall trees, and through the small openings in the leaves, he saw a wooden village occupied by people with very thick body hair. Although he'd never met them before, it was safe to assume that they were the werewolf race. Then, the lower right quadrant was also a region filled with forestry. However, the vegetation in this place was completely out of this continent. Literally, It had glowing trees and tentacles that he only ever saw back when he briefly visited the forbidden lands of the Elven Kingdom. Then, located at the very center of the region was a place which most resembled that of a human civilization. There were these giant, towering castles that, from above, looked like stone spikes that one would see in a trap underground. He didn't have to guess who inhabited this region. He saw wyverns flying across the skies, landing on these towers with their limbs hugging the entire structure. Wow! In a gathering of beast folks, I would have thought that the arrangement for regions would be a lot more equal. They could have separated each region like a pie chart, with each race having an equal share in New Sparta. But clearly, the Draconians had the advantage against the others as they completely dominated the center of the territory. I did hear that the Draconians were the one who started New Sparta, so it would make sense why they had the centerpiece. The other beast folks could have just moved in after the Draconians had already settled in. So the only space they had left was outwards. That's where the beast folks were living. But what about humans? As he moved closer, he finally saw a cluster of small huts outside New Sparta. Is that? On the outskirts of New Sparta, he saw a collection of wooden shacks and cabins which had plenty of humans occupying inside. There must have been tens of thousands of humans just camped outside of New Sparta. He then began scanning through the crowd, searching for a familiar face when he finally found someone in the huts. He immediately exited the drone's pocket dimension and floated down towards a small hut near the lower left quadrant of New Sparta. As he got closer, he saw Reptar, with his usual cowboy hat and spurred boots, talking with his employees and commanding them with vigor. Reptar only noticed him once he finally descended into the ground. "Michael! You made it!" Reptar greeted, giving Michael a big hug. "It's been a while. How are you holding up?" he asked. "Good, good. I got lucky and had some business ventures that got me quite a few sand dollars to spare. But as you probably know, it's always not enough. That's why I'm putting all of my effort here in New Sparta." Michael looked around, noticing that the Reptar had made quite a home for himself here. Judging from the heavy-set furniture around him, it looked like Reptar was setting up for a long stay here. Reptar noticed his look and chuckled. "Our living situation is not ideal, haha. But it doesn't matter. So we are going to be staying here outside of New Sparta." "Yup. New Sparta is only for beast folks. We can only visit it or set up our shop there, but we can't be permanent tenants. But it's better this way because it would be much easier to transport our goods to and fro New Sparta." Michael didn't mind the living situation, especially since he could just teleport to the nation of Reborn whenever he needed to sleep. "But why are you all living in huts? Why not build an actual structure?" he asked Reptar. Even though they didn't have concrete to construct buildings extremely fast, they could still use conventional tricks to build a house in a matter of a month or so. "Others do," Reptar replied. "But New Sparta's only going to last a few months. A year at the most, so it just isn't worth the effort." "A year at most? I haven't heard of that." "Ah, I forgot you weren't in the meeting. The Draconians decided that New Sparta is only going to last for a limited amount of time. From this point onward, we and other companies would have to vie for the beast folks' attention. You see all those other people in the distance." Reptar pointed at the small cluster of huts surrounding them. "They're from neighboring territories, and we will have to compete with them and prove to the beast folks that we are most deserving of their time. Things aren't settled just through pure strength alone, as other beastfolks value something other than power. They might value entertainment, utility, and other such factors. But at the end of the year, there will be a show of power. The Draconians are going to be setting up a massive tournament involving all companies and all beast folks in New Sparta. The one who wins will get the respect of the Draconians. And you know what they're famous for, right?" "No," Reptar chuckled. "It's their wealth. Draconians are famous hoarders of riches. You won't believe how much sand dollars those guys have. They could have gone toe-to-toe with the conglomerates if they weren't so individualistic." Michael was glad to know that the competitions in New Sparta weren't just going to be a test of strength. Although he was pretty confident of his power, he knew that the Dragonborns weren't ready at all for that kind of event. Shiina was the only one who awakened her diva, and she was still at the first stage. Thankfully though, it seemed like the tournament would only occur at the very end of the year. Hopefully, at that point, he would have already established great connections with the beast folks and have gotten enough sand dollars to fund the Dragonborn's cultivation up to a good standard. Alaric said that I have my own place. Can you show me where it is? Reptar nodded. Of course. It's right beside mine. Right over there. He pointed at a small hut surrounded by lots of open space, ready for an expansion. Your place is actually the best position to be in. I'm quite jealous, to be honest, said Reptar. It's the nearest to the gate, meaning that you could potentially market your store to the tourists that are going to be coming in and out of New Sparta. Why didn't you get it? Reptar chuckled. Are you kidding me? I don't deserve this place. Only those that are in the major factions are the ones that have positions in similar places. Back in the meeting, they all unanimously decided that Michael and the Reborn company had the same weight as the major factions. He was just below that of the legacies but above that of the rising. 6. He was an entire league of his own. That was why he deserved this spot. Thanks, Reptar. No problem. Just holler out to me if you want to ask any questions. We're neighbors after all. Michael then walked over to the small hut reserved for him. The whole place was literally built with just a few sticks as foundation, with a giant cloth covered on top of it. It wasn't a place meant to give you a comfortable night's sleep. But that didn't mean it had to be. Perhaps this was a great time for him to show off the wonders of concrete to the tourists. But before doing anything, Michael decided to take a look around first. It wouldn't hurt to get the lay of the land in order to get a better perception of the different cultures of the beast folks. He couldn't just start building concrete skyscrapers out of nowhere. Perhaps some cultures wouldn't appreciate that kind of stuff, especially if it was done out of nature. More probable than not, constructing concrete buildings would be okay, but it was still best to make sure. He walked back over to Reptar's hut and asked him about entering inside New Sparta. You want to take a look around? Yeah, sure. Anyone is allowed inside as long as you're just there to have a tour. But beware that some beast folks value their privacy. So you can't just enter inside a home where you're not invited. Of course, Michael wasn't planning on doing that. He was just going to have a look around and see the different cultures of beast folks he had yet to see. He had seen the vampires, the elves, and the mermen out of their habitat. It would be a cool sight to see them in the comfort of their own homes. He then walked alongside the walls of New Sparta, which was made out of big stone blocks fit together like a puzzle. On the way, he saw many other huts and cabins housing people from all over the royal continent. After eavesdropping on a few conversations he came across, he found out that there were even some visitors who were from the northern part of the Queen's regions. Beyond Metropolis was the lands where most of the conglomerates were stationed. This meant that the quality of life and cultivation there were generally a lot stronger than that of the people in the lower regions. I heard that even the conglomerates are interested in New Sparta. Damn. And here I thought Metropolis was going to be our biggest competition. Can't they have just stayed up north? They can't not when there's draconians involved. Michael continued on and eventually reached the entrance of New Sparta. As he stepped inside, he found himself in the middle of two vastly different environments. When he looked to the right side, he immediately knew which race it belonged to. Instead of buildings, this quadrant only had a large lake inside. This was the merman's side. He peered through the ocean-blue water, seeing glowing corals and other fuzzy lights buried showing signs of an aquascape underneath all of this lake. It must have taken immense magic to create this lake. In contrast to that environment, the left side of the quadrant was vastly different and more Earth-like. It contained a forest made out of tall, thin trees that reminded him of the countryside. All it needed were vast mountain ranges, and this would have been a sight to see. In the distance, he saw wooden cabins and shacks forming a tight-knit community, a tribe, perhaps. That's the werewolves' side. There was a very thick fog that obscured people from peering through inside, but Michael used his supreme skill to see through the light mana signatures in the forest. Finally, he saw the first signs of werewolves in the area. On the closest tribe near him, he saw a few light mana signatures cutting down logs, presumably to use as firewood. There Werewolves? From a mana perspective, they looked human. He saw no difference between himself and them. If they weren't living in this quadrant, then he would have thought that they were a normal person. No, wait, there is a difference. Now, he used his drone's ability vision to see through the fog. And finally, he saw their hearts beating with an intense orange glow. That was a Dao heart. I guess they look human because they are human. They just haven't transformed into a werewolf yet. Once he got a look of the two quadrants beside him, he then put his attention in front of him. Following a straight path of the rough road head, he would be face to face with tall spires that littered the skyline. That was the draconian side. He was interested in meeting them as well. Which place should I go to first? Right now, it seemed better to go and visit the merman's place, given that he was most familiar with them out of all the beastfolk races. He walked to the edge of the lake and readied a simple water-breathing spell to keep him alive as he dove down to the depths of the water. But before he could even take a single step into the water, someone called out to him, "You can't enter through there." He turned around and saw a human man wearing an attire that wasn't a custom in Metropolis. "Why not?" he asked. "No one's able to visit the merman as of late," the man replied. "Try it out. You can't enter the water." Michael turned around and dipped his feet into the water, only to find himself walking on a solid surface. It was as if he was walking on ice, yet the water under his feet was clearly liquid, still rippling from the quiet waves brought about by the wind. "The merman seemed to be quite busy with something," the man said, walking beside Michael. "Hi, I'm Brock." "Michael," he replied as they shook hands. Brock looked at him up and down. "Say, you're pretty young for this, aren't you? Are you alone? Where's your group?" "They'll come later," Michael replied. "Well, you better have come with a lot of backup because there's a lot of competition going around. Metropolis, Zenthaven City, and Bonacore Town. There's lots of big names that I do not want to cross. I'm just from a small town near the eastern shore. Nobody even knows its name, so nobody is going to take me seriously. That's why us small groups should work together. We stand no chance against those big guys if we fight each other." It seemed that Brock approached Michael in the hopes of recruiting him for something. Seeing his obvious youth, Brock thought Michael was a young, scrappy businessman who hoped to make a name for himself in New Sparta. Michael didn't correct him. "What do you say?" Brock asked him. "Sure. What are we doing?" "Come, I'll show you around," Brock said, gesturing for him to come along. Brock led him near the boundary of the werewolves' quadrant. There, he saw a big gathering of humans who all seemed to be ready and geared up for a fight. Judging from the look on their faces, as well as the heavy armors and well-polished weapons they had on their backs, it seemed that there was something going on in this place that involved a fight. "What's happening?" he asked Brock. "These are all the people who are going to be fighting for a chance to enter the Brown Blood tribe," Brock replied. "Brown Blood tribe?" Brock nodded. "Yep, that's one of the tribes in the werewolf race. They are currently one of the few who are offering a chance for humans to enter into their place and have a chance to establish a relationship with them." Michael was pleasantly surprised to have lucked in on this event. After all, that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to try and meet with the werewolves, and it seemed that this competition was what was going to give him that. What's the competition about? We still don't know, but given that most of the werewolves value physical strength above all others, we think that they're going to be giving out a test of physical feats. That's what we are all preparing for. Brock and the others were looking as prepared as possible, bringing all kinds of weapons and armor that would make them seem appealing. To the werewolves, they didn't want to look feeble. Just then, Michael heard some murmurs coming out of the group. They seemed to be talking about a person in the far distance. Michael saw an old man with white hair and a hunched back, walking along with a few other tanned humans wearing fur clothes. "Those are werewolves," Brock whispered to Michael. "Even that old man?" Michael asked. Those brawny men looked like the typical werewolves he saw in fantasy, but not the old man. He seemed more fit for sci-fi books. "No, that old man is different. Don't you know him? Michael shook his head. That's Professor Lichtenstein. He's a famous historian that even Vanderbilt greatly respects. He might not be physically strong, but the knowledge he possesses makes him a very powerful human. Michael stared at the professor, seeing him walk with the werewolves, who gave him respect by walking at his slow pace. Why is he here? He asked Brock. That I don't know, but if Professor Lichtenstein is here, then there must be some kind of discovery that has been unearthed. That's the only reason why he has shown himself in New Sparta. Professor Lichtenstein looked to be the type of person obsessed with history. He looked like the typical nerdy hermits who would know everything about a specific niche topic that was thought to have been lost in history. What kind of discovery are they talking about? Michael couldn't help but be curious about whatever Professor Lichtenstein was interested in. Perhaps it was something that he too would like to know. So, he secretly brought out his drone and piloted it to fly closer to the professor and the three werewolves right next to him. The drone's surface flickered, with its individual hexagonal shapes slowly becoming more and more transparent as they took on the exact color and light intensity of their environment, effectively turning it invisible. Of course, there was still the problem of the propellers making too much noise to be stealthy, but he already had a solution to that by shrinking it to a size that can fit squarely on his palms. At this size, the propeller's noise would be reduced to a mere buzzing sound that could only be heard in a few meters. Still, there could be a chance in which the werewolves had a distinct sense of hearing that surpassed that of humans. After all, that was what werewolves were famous for back in his previous life. The werewolves still looked human and had mortal characteristics for the most part, but he still didn't want to risk it. He decided to submerge the drone underground, making use of the phase-through upgrade that he purchased a while back. As soon as the drone sank into the soil beneath his feet, the buzzing sound practically turned non-existent. The deeper he went with the drone, the more stealthier it became. He didn't go too deep though, as he too wouldn't be able to hear the conversations between Professor Lichtenstein and the people next to him. Once he was directly under the professor, he slowly ascended the drone. He finally picked up on the sounds above him. I can't be late for this meeting. Tell your patriarch that I appreciate his hospitality, but I cannot stay here for much longer. I must leave. I'm so close to finally discovering the history of modern humans, Professor Lichtenstein said, looking haggard. The patriarch insists. He greatly values your insight in werewolf history, said one of the tanned humans next to him. For a brief moment, he could hear a sound of a low growl emanating from the humans. It didn't look like it was on purpose, but rather a product of their nature as half-man, half-wolf. Don't you get it? The professor asked, grabbing his hair passionately. We can finally find out what happened in the ancient era. Why we lost our ability to wield all 8 elements. Michael was shocked as he heard the professor's passionate words. If what he said was true, then his impatience definitely made a lot of sense. If he was in the same position, he wouldn't have even bothered with honorifics and would have teleported away without a second thought. The professor seemed to have been searching for the lost history that separated the ancient era to the modern one. And it seemed that he was finally close to getting an answer to why humans lost the ability to use unity, Michael muttered to himself. As soon as he said that, the professor turned his head towards the group of humans in the distance. His eyes were searching for someone, with insanity almost reflected in his irises. But a couple of moments later, he shook his head. Look, I must be getting crazy because of my impatience. I'm sorry, but I must go now, Professor Lichtenstein said, pulling on the rucksack on his back and turning away from the persistent werewolves. He wasn't entertaining any of their arguments and kept on walking. Seeing this, Michael had an intense urge to follow after him. Whatever the professor was about to discover, he wanted to discover as well. He and all the Rebornians he awakened were the only ones who could wield unity. If somehow the professor figured out the truth about its mystery, then maybe he could find out why the bratty goddess gave him this power when he reincarnated. He quickly turned around and followed after the professor. He didn't even hesitate. Hey, where are you going? Brock asked him. I'm sorry, but I have something more important to attend to, he replied. Brock then pointed behind him. But look, the brown blood tribe has finally shown themselves. They're ready to announce the competition. Behind him, a group of tanned and muscular men, all wearing only loincloths in their lower body. These were the werewolves of the brown blood tribe. They had numerous black and red tattoos chiseled on their faces, neck, and chests, symbolizing their strength within the tribe. The one with the most tattoo on his body, a man with a square jaw and a feathered hairdress, walked up and greeted the humans in front of him. "May the moon be with you." The werewolves looked at the humans with anticipation. May the moon be also with you," Brock hurriedly said, performing an awkward bow. Once he did that, the other humans followed his lead. "That is how the werewolves greet each other," Brock whispered to Michael. Only then did the werewolf wearing the feathered headdress nodded in satisfaction. "I am Lupin, chief and patriarch of the brown blood tribe. I have come here in search of a great warrior, one that will be worth enough to serve alongside us in this territory." Lupin's words brought excitement to many people looking for this exact opportunity. If they became of service to the brown blood tribe, then the potential business ventures and sand-dollar salaries that they could earn could set them up for a lifetime. However, only those blessed by the moon shall be allowed in our tribes. The other werewolves beside Lupin crossed their arms on their chests and glared at the humans in front of them. A subtle wolf's howl emanated from their bodies, followed by an invisible shockwave of pressure that brought up a gust of wind that blew towards the humans. This was a test. Those who flinched would know to themselves that this competition was above their level. A few people dejectedly turned around and left with their bodies still, shivering from fear. Brock looked shaken, but he was still able to stand still and face the werewolves with conviction. "Good," Lupin praised. "We value humans who show great talent with the sword, one that could cut even the toughest of hides. We are not looking for mediocre. We only want the best. Therefore, you humans must prove yourselves to be worthy by besting other humans of your level in a duel." Brock inwardly celebrated as he heard that. "Did you hear that, Michael? They're searching for swordsmen. It's going to be a tournament that I have a chance to win in." But contrary to Brock and the rest of the humans around him, Michael was way too caught up in another thing to be excited at this revelation. He was in a dilemma. Should he follow Professor Lichtenstein, or should he pursue the chance to make a connection with the werewolves? He was having quite the problem. On the one hand, he could be on the verge of unraveling a mystery that plagued the entire world. And on the other, he could open himself up to an entirely new source of sand-dollar revenue. Both were extremely important. He wasn't willing to give up on either one of them. "What are you doing, Michael? We have to go write our names in the tournament." Brock urged Michael to line up alongside the other humans waiting to show their swordsmanship to the werewolves. There were only limited slots, which meant that Michael could very well miss this opportunity if he kept on hesitating. After a few seconds of deliberating, he made his choice. He turned around, intending to catch up on the professor. "You're not going to join the tournament?" Brock asked him, disappointed. Michael looked back at him. "I am going to join," he replied. "But how? It's just not going to be me who's participating." This was a competition meant for swordsmen. Michael was a little bit familiar with the sword, given that he frequently used his unity saber to fight. However, it would be a disservice to all swordsmen if he were to proclaim himself as one of them. Just because he used a sword didn't mean he had mastery over it. Now, if he were forced to fight as a swordsman, there's always the choice of using ChatJK5's enormous database containing martial arts like kendo, arnis, or fencing. However, he'd still lag behind against a true talent of the sword. So, it would be best to have someone actually proficient with swordsmanship to enter the tournament instead of him. He just had the person in mind. The shadow underneath his feet extended outwards, forming a giant half-dome that devoured the mana in the air. Then a second later, the shadow subsided and out came Jakku, the eldest of the Dragonborns. The dark blue-scaled Rebornian was still laying down on his side, his eyes closed, and a comical bubble coming out of his nose. "Pop! Huh? Young?" Where am I? Jaku looked around, grasping for the comfortable bed and pillows around. Except, he felt nothing but cold hard ground underneath him. Get up, Jaku. I have a task for you, Michael said, grinning. After leaving Jaku in charge of the swordsman tournament, Michael immediately ran off to catch up with Professor Lichtenstein. Despite looking frail and old, the professor moved spryly, almost running as he charged towards his destination. Thankfully, Michael had the foresight of having his drone follow the professor from behind, or else he would have lost him in the enormous territory of New Sparta. The space in between the quadrants for the beastfolks was massive. There were inner walls and watchtowers separating the boundary and the territory inside the quadrant itself. And in between these walls, there were some fortunate humans who were able to set up their own stalls and shops along the path. Many humans were shouting to the passerbys, luring them to try out their unique products. Werewolf cologne here. Just one spray and werewolves will find you more pleasing to the nose. You can have it now for just 10 sand. I got a map of the vampire quadrant. You won't get lost in the darkness and accidentally find yourself buried in tombs. It's just 5 sand. Those were just two of many merchants shouting their offers out in the path, making the boundary between the quadrants quite lively. Michael squeezed his way through crowded streets, with humans and carriages alike moving through the path cramped up like sardines. After following the direction of his drone, he eventually caught up to the professor, seeing him look around him anxiously before running towards a corner. He ran after him, finally pushing past the crowd and into the isolated corner. As soon as he turned the corner, Professor Lichtenstein suddenly jumped out in front of him with a crazed look on his face. Who are you? Who sent you? Michael immediately raised his hands and tried to portray that he had no harmful intentions. No one sent me, he assured the professor, but it didn't seem to work. The man was too paranoid to believe anything right now. Tell me now or else I'll destroy what you value the most. Professor Lichtenstein took out a knife from his pockets. Then he pointed it towards his own head. If you don't confess now, I'll destroy my own brain, Lichtenstein threatened. Michael underestimated how crazy the professor would be. He didn't think that following him would lead him to be suicidal. One would think that he'd use the knife to try and kill his oppressors. But instead, his first thought was to destroy his own brain. How crazy would one have to be for that to be their line of thinking? I'm not here because someone sent me. I'm only here because I'm curious about what you said earlier. The professor still pointed the knife in his own head, just a mere inch away from penetrating his temple. But thankfully, though, the craziness in his eyes lessened. He seemed to be starting to believe in Michael's words. The professor looked behind Michael. Looks like you really are alone, but I'm still not convinced. How would you even know what I'm talking about? I have my ways, Michael said. But does that even matter? Why are you so paranoid anyway? The professor stared at Michael before he paced back and forth, biting on his nails. I'm so close. I can feel it. This is going to be the discovery of a lifetime and will change the world as we know it. I've spent my whole life searching for this answer, and you can be damn sure that I'm going to protect it for myself. Michael was starting to understand what kind of person the professor was. Lichtenstein was akin to a person holding a winning lotto number. Anyone would feel anxious holding that ticket. After all, if he was the one who solved the lifelong mystery about the ancient era, then his name would be hailed in the history books as one of the most influential figures of the world. For a historian and a professor like Lichtenstein, that would be the greatest honor one could have in their profession. So, it made sense why the professor acted like this, thinking that he was mere moments away from a breakthrough. It's fine if you don't believe me, the professor said somberly. Everybody thinks I'm crazy, but I know it. If I could get the last piece of the puzzle, then I'll finally know why we lost the power to wield all 8 elemental mana, the one called Dash. Unity, Michael muttered, finishing the professor's words for him. And as soon as he said that, the professor backed away from him in utter shock. How do you know that? Michael looked at the professor. Unity is what happens when all 8 elements are combined. and it's what allowed the ancient humans to wield the immense power that they had. The professor stood there, speechless. He didn't think anyone other than him would know about that. But just as the professor was about to speak, the door behind them opened. The door opened and a man wearing a hoodie that covered half his face appeared before them. He clearly valued his privacy, seeing as he kept on looking around as if wary of any people that would eavesdrop on their conversation. "Professor Lichtenstein," the man greeted. "Our leader will see you. Now dash." But before he could even finish his sentence, he noticed that there was one other person that was unaccounted for. "Excuse me, who is this?" the hooded man asked, gesturing towards Michael. Professor Lichtenstein, without a moment's hesitation, made up an excuse for Michael. "He's my protege. He's studying under me to learn more about the world's history." The man stared at Michael, looking at him from head to toe. Even though his eyes were obscured from his hoodie, Michael could feel the man observing him with the utmost intensity. Unfortunately, the professor's excuse didn't seem to work on him. "Professor, you do know that our leader wants this meeting to be as discreet as possible. We do not want unknown people finding out about this," the hoodies man said. This would have been the greatest excuse for the professor to leave Michael behind. However, Michael's mutterance of the word unity made him all the more curious about the boy's true identity. If Michael knew about that mystery of the world, then perhaps they had more in common than he first thought. "He has to be with me," the professor insisted. "I won't be able to do my work if I don't have him by my side, or do you not need my help anymore?" Lichtenstein's threat of completely abandoning this meeting seemed to have finally worked on the hooded man. He bit his lips before eventually nodding his head. "All right, both of you follow me. Under no circumstances are you to leave my side," he instructed them. After that, the man pulled his hoodie down, further obscuring his face before he started walking back through where Michael and the professor came from. "Follow me," the professor said to Michael, signaling for him to stay by his side. While they were walking, the professor leaned in towards Michael and whispered, "If they ask you any questions, just say that I'm your teacher and I instructed you to not say anything." Michi looked at him. Why did you have to lie? He appreciated the professor for covering for him, but Michael didn't see the need to lie in the first place. "The meeting that I'm about to have is supposed to be as discreet as possible. They could get in trouble if people find out that they're about to give me this information, so you'll have to excuse them if they seem a little paranoid." Michael understood that and didn't question it any further. He just followed behind the professor and the hooded man before they eventually exited out of New Sparta and came across a hut out in the distance. The hut was hastily made. He couldn't see any signs of furniture inside after peeking through the small gap in between the cloth door. It seemed that this hut was specifically made to be disassembled as soon as the meeting was over. Eventually, they reached the hut and the man signaled for Michael and the professor to stop. "First, I'll inform my leader of your arrival," he said before entering the small hut. Michael could hear a faint discussion from two men talking about him. The hooded man was basically asking for permission from his leader about the unexpected appearance of the professor's protege. Eventually, it seemed that their leader relented. The hooded man came back and gestured for Michael and the professor to come inside. As they walked through, Michael saw that they were only meeting one person. It was a middle-aged man with a stocky build, a bald head, and a patch on his right eye. "Welcome, Professor," said the supposed leader. Professor Lichtenstein immediately moved towards the man and sat on the chair opposite him. He didn't waste any time before asking the question he so desperately wanted to find out. "Do you know where the antique is located?" The bald man with the eye patch didn't answer the professor's question and instead turned towards Michael, gesturing for him to have a seat right next to the professor. "Please sit. You can call me One Eye. May I know who you are? Forgive me, but I haven't heard of the professor having a protege by his side. He's quite infamous for being too focused on his studies, making him neglect forming any connections outside of the scrolls and books he's buried in." Michael was about to speak before the professor answered the question for him. "His name is Kyo. I found him an orphan and took him in as my student after realizing his talent in history." "Oh," One Eye muttered. What makes one talented in history? Do you perhaps know the history of Godforge pieces? This was a test intended to truly see if Kyo was truly the professor's protege. The professor started sweating as he realized that One Eye wasn't going to be as easily fooled as he thought. He quickly opened his mouth, about to answer, when Michael stepped in and gave a response. From what I learned about history, the Godforge were once a solid piece. However, a great cataclysmic event shattered it into pieces, with the dwarves retaining a large piece but most of it was scattered all around the world. One Eye raised his eyebrows, surprised that Michael was able to answer his question. Even Professor Lichtenstein was shocked. Perhaps his lie was true. Perhaps this boy truly was talented in history just like he was. Impressive, One Eye praised. I do not know your true identity, but your skill in history proves that you indeed have the right to be here. The professor perked up. Does this mean we can finally talk about the antique? One Eye nodded. Yes, just as promised, you'll help me with my problem, and I'll help with yours in turn. Then, One Eye gestured for the hooded man to fetch something from the chest on the corner of the room. After retrieving the item, the hooded man presented it towards the professor and Michael. It was a furled-up scroll, and after unrolling it out, it turned out to be a map degraded by time, with lots of tiny holes and tears that made it completely vague as to where this place was truly located. Right at the center of the map was an X mark. This is a treasure map that we chanced upon, and according to the diary that accompanied it, we believe it to contain a mithril relic that is extremely well preserved. We want this, Professor. Can you help us locate its exact position? The professor looked over the map, subconsciously rubbing his chin as he did so. The crazed look on his face was replaced by one of seriousness and focus. Only a map from history could make him act like this. This must be a few hundred years old, the professor concluded. It's not from anywhere in the royal continent, that's for sure. One Eye frowned. Are you sure, Professor? Where is it exactly? Lichtenstein nodded. This map is not human-made. Even though Professor Lichtenstein was the best historian of the royal continent, even he was stumped by this map. There simply was too much information lost over time. There were too many possibilities as to where this map was exactly located. And since there was no reference and no landmarks in the map, the professor didn't even know how big the map was supposed to be. It could range from an entire continent to a small patch of land somewhere in the wilderness. There was just no way to know. One Eye and the professor didn't give up, though. They kept on giving their guesses and insights to each other in the hopes that they could figure out the mystery. Meanwhile, Michael finally had the chance to look over the map himself. And after seeing it for himself, there was no wonder that the professor couldn't figure it out. It was basically just a sketch of a vague landmass, with basically no details whatsoever. The only thing there was the giant X that detailed the exact position of the treasure. He realized that this was way above his pay grade. He actually wasn't a historian. But just as he was about to give up, he suddenly heard a notification from ChatJK5. Would you like me to cross-reference the treasure map with the database? The chances of success is about 99%. Michael was surprised. You can do that? Of course, Michael. You underestimate me. I am the best AL assistant. In history, figuring this out is just a matter of time. The processing power of ChatJK5 was truly something to be admired. Within just a few seconds, an answer was laid right out in front of him. A 3D holographic map was displayed in his vision, showing a tiny island full of strange vegetation like trees having tentacles and mushrooms growing as big as boulders. On the top, the name of the island was written. The Forbidden Island Elven Kingdom. What a coincidence. He had just learned about the Elven Kingdom's map just a few days ago. Not only that, but he'd also visited the same exact island just recently. My apologies, but I would need at least a few months of study before I can decipher this map, said the professor. That is very understandable, but disappointing, One Eye muttered. Just then, Michael raised his hand. I think I know where this is, he said. Both men turned to look towards him. You do? The professor asked, stupefied. Tell me, One Eye said desperately. his eyes having a shine of hope. Michael then took the map and traced the outline of the vague landmass, going over the parts where most of the detail had been completely erased. He continued this until the professor suddenly realized what Michael was completing. "It's the Forbidden Islands," Liechtenstein exclaimed as he took the map from Michael's hands. "By the gods! It fits perfectly on the map. This must be it." One Eye looked over the map as well. "The Forbidden Islands? Where is that?" he asked. The Forbidden Island is located on the southwest side of the Elven Kingdom. It stands alone and uninhabited because of the dangerous Zephyrs. The only ones who visit that place are archaeologists like me, who are extremely interested in learning more about Zephyrs. Last I heard, the only one who came out of there alive is Lazarus. But he's a mystic master, so he's capable of surviving on his own accord, Professor Liechtenstein answered. Hearing this, One Eye couldn't help but be disappointed. If it is indeed located in the Forbidden Islands, then I'm afraid that all of our efforts would have been for naught. We are unprepared to journey into an entirely different continent, much less venture into the breeding grounds of Zephyrs. Professor Liechtenstein felt sorry for him. Why are you so desperate to get this treasure anyway? Just to get this new mithril relic? One Eye nodded before taking out a flute from his back. This mithril relic looked to be worse for wear, with lots of rust and broken off pieces. All of that would surely mess with the sound produced by the instrument. This is my current weapon. As you can see, it is not a standard weapon and quite rare even in the ancient era. Due to its state, the effectiveness leaves much to be desired. It is hindering my cultivation. I need a new flute, one that can stand up against the better mithril relics that I'm going to be up against. There was a high chance that the treasure map would contain what I need, but it seemed that this simply is not meant for me. There was a brief silence before Michael spoke up. Why can't you try it out in the Forbidden Islands if you desperately need it? One Eye sighed. Yes, it is possible with enough preparations. However, this would undoubtedly take months if not years to complete. Just the journey alone back and forth will cost me lots of precious time. If we were to go, then we would completely miss the All Tournament in New Sparta at the end of the year. And this is the very reason why I wanted a new mithril relic in the first place. The All Tournament? That must be the one that Reptar is talking about. It's going to be something that everyone in New Sparta will participate in. I am from Bonacore Town. We could be considered as the top 3 territories in New Sparta, aside from Metropolis and Zenthaven City. I know my limits. Metropolis is a giant that I know I cannot fight against. Just the legacies alone will be hard to overcome. Not only that, but I heard that there's a new company in Metropolis who is said to have bested even Alaric. It's just a rumor, of course, but I do not want to take that chance. Professor Liechtenstein perked up. Someone was able to beat Alaric? One Eye nodded. There is a rumor that a magnetic, barely in the 4th stage of body formation, was able to beat Alaric who, as it turned out, had advanced to the nascent spirit realm. What? The professor couldn't help but express his shock and surprise at this unexpected news. You mean to tell me that someone was able to beat Alaric, even though he had already awakened in the nascent spirit realm? And his opponent was only in the 4th stage? Preposterous. One Eye couldn't help but chuckle. That's what everyone thinks as well. It is too far-fetched to believe that it is true. Many think that it is just propaganda meant to scare off Metropolis opponents in New Sparta. But I do not want to take that chance. I will stay away from any of them. It's not just far-fetched, it's impossible, Professor Liechtenstein declared. There is no way that someone in the body formation realm could beat someone in the nascent spirit realm, even if for a second. Even a 9th stage body formation magnetic will barely last a second against someone like Alaric now that he'd advanced to the next realm. And a 4th stage doing that? It's simply not true. The only thing that would make it possible is if they're a natural magnetic, but they're gone just like the ancient humans. Michael stayed quiet as One Eye and the professor talked about the supposed rumor involving him. He couldn't blame them for their disbelief. It was only natural to think that it was a lie after putting out all the facts in that manner. Anyone would think so. Heck, unless one witnessed it for themselves back in the auction, then anyone would have thought it was an exaggeration. Natural magnetic? He asked Liechtenstein. Can you explain more, Professor? As a historian, there was no one better to ask other than the professor about natural magnetics. They have a natural affinity to the Godforge pieces, wielding them with power beyond a 100% efficiency. Only they can produce a force much greater than those who are on the same level. Some even say that the divas born from their awakening are much more advanced, gaining sentience in their birth. After hearing this, I couldn't help but be interested. Sentience? I can only imagine what a natural magnetic will become after reaching the nascent spirit realm. The professor chuckled at the man's worries. You need not worry so much. Natural magnetics are purely theoretical. The rumor about that genius in Metropolis is surely just that, a rumor. Meanwhile, back in the brown-blood werewolf tribe territory, Jakku found himself trudging his feet as he walked towards the registration. Michael instructed him to win the tournament, and he will, but he just didn't get why he had to go through all of this tournament. This type of competition meant that there were many rounds he had to go through, which he considered a hassle. Sigh. I'll win this tournament for boss and treat myself to a 3-day sleeping sesh. Just then, he felt a nudge on his back. He turned around and saw Brock looking at him with a curious expression. You're with Michael? Brock asked. Yes. Boss instructed me to participate in the tournament. Brock couldn't help but look at Jakku from head to toe with a concerned look. He saw the sword tied around Jakku's waist, which meant that his skills were perfectly fit for this tournament. However, Jakku was clearly not a human. He wasn't even part of the beastfolk race. He was a demi-human. And everyone knew that demi-humans do not have the ability to wield ability power, unlike humans with their God-forged pieces and the beastfolks with their Tao hearts. The only thing that demi-humans had up their sleeves was magic. And most species weren't particularly adept with those. I'll help you out whenever I can, Brock said. But, good luck. Clearly, Brock didn't think that Jakku would last long in the tournament. Jakku didn't seem to notice Brock's look of pity. He was too lazy to care about what other people thought of him. He simply needed to do his job and return back to his bed as fast as he could. After one of the werewolves took his name for the registration, Jakku went to the very back of the group while the announcement was being made. I have before me the list of great warriors seeking to become an aid to the Brown-Blood tribe, said Lupin, their chief. The moon decrees a fair trial. For us to do so, a simple test must be enforced. Just then, one of the muscular, tanned men right next to Lupin walked up and showed a straw dummy of a human figure in front of the crowd. Each of you will be given a chance to show your skills in this straw dummy. It has been enchanted with lunar magic to move and dodge like that of a cheetah. What you have to do is simple. The more you kill, the better your position will be in the tournament. Lupin then nodded to his fellow tribesmen. Follow these men, and they will lead you to your different testing areas. Multiple werewolves walked forward and began pointing at a specific human in the group. Then, they began leading them towards the forest quadrant of the werewolves. It wasn't long before the thick crowd had lessened, and only a few left remained. Just then, Brock was finally given a designated area of his own. Before he left, though, he gave a second look to Jakku. He was about to say good luck to the Dragonborn, but he noticed that Jakku wasn't even paying attention. He was sleeping on the grass. Finally, a female werewolf approached Jakku. You, follow me. She was tall, muscular, and tanned just like the other werewolves. She could definitely tussle if she had to. The female werewolf immediately walked out, expecting Jakku to follow her. But he didn't. Annoyed, she turned around to scold him. But when she looked, he was already gone. She quickly turned forwards, seeing Jakku walking beside her while yawning. A look of surprise flashed across her face. He was fast. Your testing area is this way, she said to him. Finally, she led Jakku to a private clearing in the woods containing more than 20 straw dummies scattered around the area. Are you ready? She asked him. Jakku stifled a yawn, not even grabbing his sword yet. How many you defeat will decide your ranking in the tournament. It can even disqualify you if not enough have been killed, she reminded him. But he just nodded along while yawning, seemingly not worried at all about the test. The female werewolf was annoyed and immediately howled at the wooden dummies. As soon as her voice reached the straw targets, they suddenly burst forth with life, moving and strafing around hastily. Their movements were fast and completely random. Not only that, but they could move parts of their bodies independently, making this test truly challenging for swordsmen. The female werewolf then took out a strand of her hair and struck its tip with her finger, causing it to light up into a tiny flame. "You have until this hair is burned," she reminded him. But even with this time limit imposed upon him, Jaku still kept on yawning. Annoyed, the female werewolf howled at the straw dummies again, activating a new magic within them that increased their aggressiveness. Instead of dodging away, these straw dummies would now attack with an even faster moveset. 3 of the straw dummies surrounded Jaku from all sides, intending to bash his head with their straw arms imbued with werewolf magic. But just as it was about to hit him, electricity suddenly emerged from his scales, flowing down towards his katana. Then Jaku disappeared. An instant later, the 3 straw dummies were cut cleanly in half. It was only then that Jaku reappeared in the same place as he was before, with his sword still in its scabbard as if he hadn't even done anything yet. Meanwhile, the straw dummies kept on charging at Jaku without a second thought. And the outcome was the same. They would get cut down with such speed that no one could even see him pull his sword out. The female werewolf couldn't believe her eyes. She increased the difficulty thinking that he was going to get scared off from the tournament. But instead, he defeated them with ease. "Hey, thanks for making it easy on me," Jaku waved to the werewolf. "It would have been a hassle if I had to catch them myself." Not even a minute had passed since the start of the tests. Many competitors fought tooth and nail to increase the number of straw dummies they cut down. Some found the targets to be too fast and too random, only being able to cut down a few of them. The werewolves designed the straw dummies to not move like a human. This would challenge a swordsman's ability to think on the spot and not rely on rigid stances. Eventually, the test finally ended and the competitors were led back into the group. Lupin looked at all of them and nodded. "Many of you have shown great skill," he said. Many werewolves were standing behind Lupin, all of whom had observed a swordsman on their test. One of them was the female werewolf assigned to Jaku. And even now, she couldn't help but sneak glances at him past the crowd. He was still acting as aloof as before, not even paying attention to their tribe chief's announcements. He was just laying down on the grass, already half asleep. "These humans may be weak, but they are great at using weapons," said one of the werewolves beside her. "There's a lot of promising talent," another one said, "but I think that my swordsman will prevail." He was able to kill 50 dummies in the whole span of the test. Many werewolves were gladly surprised to hear that. They were intrigued to know who it was. "Do you see that human there with a green head of hair and a sword as big as he is?" They all turned to look at the man standing proudly in the crowd. He was quite young, but full of hardened muscles that the werewolves appreciated. He was leaning on his giant greatsword, standing proudly and bragging to the people beside him. Just then, Lupin was given a scroll from one of the werewolves, and his attention turned to the same exact human with spiky green hair. This test does not decide the winner of the tournament, but it has shown who among here has great potential. He has bested 50 targets, cleaving them cleanly in half. Mauricio Aubert. The group started clapping for Mauricio, congratulating him for his amazing performance. They were all competitors in this tournament, but it wouldn't hurt to establish friendly relations with someone who could eventually become allies with the brown-blood werewolf tribe. "As expected, he's going to win this tournament," said Brock. "He's the proud prodigy of the Aubert Company after all." Brock knew then and there that there was no chance for him to win this tournament. He could only hope that the werewolves would appreciate his skills and deem him worth enough to be allied with. He quickly turned back to Jaku, who didn't seem all that interested in the outcome of the test. "How did you do?" Jaku shrugged. "I did fine," he answered, not even opening his eyes. "Why are you not worried about the tournament? Don't you see how strong Mauricio is? He cut down 50 of those dummies." "HM? I don't know who that is." Brock couldn't believe Jaku hadn't heard of Mauricio or the Aubert Company. He was about to explain when Jaku raised his hand. I don't need to know, Jaku said. It doesn't matter who he is. Then Jaku went back to sleeping on the grass without a care in the world. Brock was speechless. He couldn't understand how Jaku was so confident that he didn't even care about any of his competitors. Did he not care about losing? Or did he know that he wouldn't lose? Meanwhile, as the werewolves and the humans were praising Mauricio for his achievements in the test, the female werewolf stayed silent. One of her friends noticed her unusual quietness. What's wrong? The tribe chief instructs us to keep a close eye on this Mauricio. He may be the one that we are looking for, he said. But the female werewolf shook her head. I don't think so. Why not? Because I think it's going to be him who's going to win, the female werewolf said, pointing at Jaku. Her friend was obviously confused. Him? He is not a beast folk nor a magnetic. Yes, she nodded. But his skill in the sword is undeniable. How did he perform in the test? Was he close to cutting 50 targets as well? The female werewolf shook her head. No, he got 40 targets. Then why would you think? 40 werewolf targets, she added. As soon as she said that, her friend couldn't help but gasp out loud. No, you didn't. Keep your voice down, she warned him. And yes, I did. I was getting annoyed at him. So I activated the transformation of the straw dummies. Those targets were no simple creations. They were meant to simulate two sides of a werewolf. The human side, the one that all the competitors were fighting, and the werewolf side. Since the dummies were supposed to mimic a real werewolf, the human side was incomparably weak and slow compared to the werewolf side of the target. The difference between the two was massive. So much so that their tribe chief instructed them to only use the human side of the straw dummies because the werewolf side would be too hard for the competitors to defeat. If the average dummy kill in the competition was around 25 targets, then it would go down to a staggering 2 or 3 kills if they faced against a werewolf dummy instead. This meant that those 40 targets that Jaku had were not equal to the 50 targets the Mauricio killed. It was so much greater. He defeated 40 of those? The female werewolf nodded. I saw it with my own eyes. His skill in the sword is the real deal. Meanwhile, back to Michael, One Eye and the professor were still continuing on with their discussion. Professor, even if you say that the genius in Metropolis is only a rumor, I do not want to take that chance. I will not antagonize those guys from Metropolis. I will let them have first place in the all tournament a year from now. But this means that second place is still up for grabs. And this will be between Zenthaven City and us from Bonacore Town. Zenthaven City? Professor Lichtenstein pondered. They used to be a capital city, one that used to house a conglomerate on par with the 5 we have now. One Eye nodded. Yes, the Aubert Company. They used to be a conglomerate but had fallen down in recent times. But I think they're about to have a comeback. They have numerous talents in the old and young generation. They will surely try to attack us first, weaken us to secure their position in the second place, just like what I would do to them. That is why I needed this mithril relic, Professor. With a new and better flute, I will be able to triumph against the Auberts and secure the future of Bonacore Town with the tourists. Professor Lichtenstein completely understood his worries. Yes, I seem to have seen a young man with green hair back in the competition set up by the Brownbloods. That must be Mauricio, One Eye muttered. It seems that they are now trying to secure their relations with the werewolves by using their prodigy. One Eye and Professor Lichtenstein thought greatly of Mauricio. He was clearly a talented young man, one that could prove to be worthy enough for the werewolves. But Michael had already scanned the people in the swordsman competition. None of them stood out to him. He was pretty sure that Jaku, as long as his laziness didn't get the better of him, would be able to claim victory over every other swordsman. The guy may be lazy, but he'll show up when he needs to, Michael thought. He didn't have to worry about it. Let's talk about your object of desires, Professor, said One Eye. Ah, yes, the professor beamed. As we agreed upon, I will help you with your problems. Even though One Eye didn't get the answer he expected from the map, he was still honorable enough to go through with his deal with the professor. "Is the antique real?" the professor asked seriously. Thankfully, One Eye confirmed it with a nod. "I saw it with my own eyes, Professor. It's real." "My goodness," Professor Lichtenstein muttered, his hands shivering from excitement. "You've seen it? Is it as I've described?" Seeing how the professor was acting, Michael became quite curious as to what this supposed antique was supposed to represent. Was it an ancient weapon? A book? "Yes, Professor. It was ancient yet filled with power. Even from afar, I could feel its immense weight in history." The professor, unable to hold down his excitement, rushed towards One Eye and stood with him face to face, their faces merely a few inches away from each other. It was as if Professor Lichtenstein wanted to steal the very memory of the antique from One Eye's mind. That was how obsessed he was with this piece of history. "Tell me where it is. Now," the professor demanded. "Calm down, Professor," said One Eye, pushing him away. "Just as you said, this antique was being smuggled out through secretive means. There are lots of companies and organizations who want to have this antique for themselves. Just the mere knowledge of this object is reserved only for those incredibly powerful or influential. Thankfully, I was able to happen upon it through my secretive channels. Professor, the antique is in New Sparta. It is currently being housed in the Merman Quadrants, held by a mermaid princess." One Eye's words sent a shockwave to the professor. His excitement ran even deeper. The very object of his dreams, of his desires, was actually right here in New Sparta. He could barely believe it. He spent years and years tracking this object down. He would come close every time, but it would always end up being a wrong lead that sent him on a goose chase that led nowhere. But now it was actually here. "Thank you, One Eye. I appreciate this information dearly." One Eye nodded. "No need to thank me, Professor. It was an equal transaction between us." But the professor wasn't having it. He knew just how important One Eye's help was in this place. "You're risking your very livelihood by giving me this information," Professor Lichtenstein said. "If other people found out about this, then they'd cut off all contact with you and you'd lose all your connections." One Eye was basically a middleman in the exchange of the antiques. He was just supposed to close his eyes and deliver the antiques to its intended destination. No questions asked. But because of the professor's request, One Eye broke his rule of privacy and tracked the package down. It was easy to see what would happen to One Eye's business if people found out about this. "This antique shouldn't be hoarded," One Eye said. "It should be studied and shared with the rest of the world. It is our duty as humans to know our history. Professor, I hope that you can finally shed light on the mystery that plagued humanity's story." Professor Lichtenstein nodded, and the two exchanged a handshake. After that, the professor didn't wait any longer and moved out of the hut. Michael followed behind him, with his face still full of questions. Before he left, though, One Eye called out to him with a bit of advice. "Kyo, I hope that you follow in your teacher's footsteps. He cares about nothing but the history of the world." Michael acknowledged his words with a nod, before turning around and running after the professor. Meanwhile, back in the Brown Blood tribe territory, Jaku found himself getting woken up by a familiar female werewolf. "Your first fight is decided," she said to him. "You will be fighting against someone called Pietro Mizal. He is a swordsman who specializes in speed and precision. We will give you a brief moment to prepare." But instead of being grateful for her words of warning, Jaku just seemed annoyed. "So I'm not fighting yet? Why'd you even wake me up?" Jaku closed his eyes again and continued to sleep. This made the female werewolf even more annoyed. She tried to help him by giving him information about his opponent, yet he didn't even say thank you. He didn't even care. Were citizens of the royal continent this callous? She angrily stomped away from him, her hair almost standing up. Pietro Mizal was one of the few swordsmen who were able to cut down more than 40 targets last round. He wasn't going to be an easy opponent. Looking at him and Jaku, the difference couldn't be more obvious. While Pietro was training with his sword, Jaku slept on the grass. While Pietro sharpened his sword, Jaku used his as a pillow. By all accounts, Pietro should win. But the female werewolf couldn't help but think about Jaku's mesmerizing performance in the test. The way he cut down those werewolf straw dummies were fast and accurate like a true master. Was this sleeping guy really the same as the one she saw? Finally, the duel started. A bell rang out, signaling the beginning of the bout. Immediately, Pietro lunged at the sleeping Jaku. He'd seen his opponent completely disregard him, choosing to sleep on the grass instead of preparing for the duel. It was insulting to him. But just as his sword was about to pierce through Jaku's dark blue scales, a burst of blue lightning suddenly emerged before Jaku disappeared completely. Pietro was caught off guard. Jaku was way too fast. Immediately, a flash sprung up on Pietro's side. His instincts kicked in, and he raised his guard just as Jaku's sword struck his blade. What? Pietro immediately dodged out, but before he could even take another step back, he saw another flash as Jaku swung his blade more than 10 times in a short instant. This left Pietro completely stunned, unable to do anything except block his attacks. Pietro didn't think that the sleeping demi-human could perform such fast moves. Just when it seemed as if Pietro was going to lose, he decided to unleash his diva. An image started to shimmer above Pietro's head, with his heart starting to release threads of ability power that would power his sword. This would completely change the game. But before he could finish his diva's manifestation, he suddenly felt a searing pain in his chest. He looked down only to see a deep cut from his right shoulder to his left stomach. Pietro fell on his knees, a face of shock still frozen on his face as he became unconscious. With Jaku's opponent lying there, the outcome of the match was obvious. Yet, the female werewolf couldn't utter any words. Jaku won. This shouldn't have happened. Pietro was in the first stage of body formation. He had a diva. This battle against Jaku should have been the easiest fight of his life. Yet somehow, the fight was finished even before Pietro could bring out his diva. Jaku was frighteningly fast, and in that last moment when he cut down Pietro, his speed exceeded even that of what he showed back in the test. Munch, munch, is it over now? Can I sleep? Jaku asked, holding a chocolate in his hands. It was true that Jaku had no chance against someone in the first stage of body formation. Ability power was too dominant. But Jaku used his speed, magnified thanks to the sugar rush ability after consuming chocolate, and cut down his opponent before Pietro could even utilize his advantage. Coupled with his mithril artifact katana, there was basically no one among mortals that could catch up with him in speed. Pietro was essentially just a normal human at that point, easily defeated. You advanced to the next round, the female werewolf muttered. Good, Jaku said, laying down on his side. Wake me up then. Meanwhile, Michael followed Professor Lichtenstein as he crossed to the other side of the boundary, leading towards the giant lake on the other quadrant. This was merman territory. He already tried to enter into the lake before, but he was unable to submerge himself into the water. There was some kind of ability power that prevented anyone from entering merman territory without their express permission. But the professor kept on walking towards the lake, eventually crossing the wall that separated the boundary and the quadrant. Now that the professor knew that the antique was here, there was nothing stopping him from getting what he wanted. He was now just a few steps away from diving feet first into the deep water lake in front of him. But before stepping in, the professor bent down on his knees and started writing on the water with his fingers. Michael was about to ask him what he was doing, when all of a sudden, the water in front of them suddenly started to swirl into a giant vortex. And a few seconds later, multiple mermen shot out from it and landed in front of them. Professor Lichtenstein, one of the mermen, greeted him. The princess would like to know why you have called for her. Michael noticed that these mermen wore a vastly different attire than the mermen he'd seen before. Reed, Serena, and all the other mermen back in the nation of Reborn all wore ocean vegetation like seaweeds and kelps as their main thread. But these mermen wore something akin to humans wearing fur. They wore the skinned hides of sea monsters as sort of a trophy as well as added protection for their bodies. Tell your princess that I would like to speak with her about the antique, the professor said directly. The mermen looked at each other and simultaneously shook their heads, as if they'd practiced it 1,000 times. "We don't know what you're talking about, Professor." Liechtenstein wasn't having it with the merman's games. "That won't work on me. Tell your princess that I will tell her what she wants in exchange for the antique." The merman still denied his entry. "Apologies, Professor, but tell her that I will help her with the Marianas jewel." As soon as the professor said those words, another vortex suddenly appeared in the lake. The mermen turned around and immediately bowed their heads at this new presence. A couple of seconds later, a mermaid shot forth from the vortex and floated down towards Michael and the professor, carefully carried down by bubbles that fit perfectly around her like a chair. "Professor, welcome to our humble abode," said the mermaid warmly. "Princess, let's not dally around." "You know what I'm here for," said the professor. "Give me the antique." While the two were conversing, Michael couldn't help but stare at the mermaid in front of him. She was different from what he expected. Serena looked like the typical mermaid one would see in fantasy shows and movies, with her flowing orange hair and skin as spotless as pearls. Not just her too, but the other female mermaids he'd seen before were much more like humans rather than mermen. The only thing differentiating them from humans were the gills on their necks, as well as the few scales that surrounded their faces. But this mermaid looked more fish rather than human. She was still beautiful on many accounts, but her features were distinctly non-human-like. Her face was that of an octopus, with tiny tentacles around her that acted like her hair. Her arms were webbed, and her feet were a fish's tail. She had no legs. She was using the bubble chair as a way to get around in the surface world without having any conventional lower limbs. So she's Serena's sister. I wonder if the two know each other. According to Serena, she had lots of siblings due to their father's love of procreation. Once again, Michael stayed silent, choosing not to tell them about his connection with other mermen. He was still undercover as Kyo, the professor's protege. He had a much higher chance of getting inside by going with this identity. After all, he didn't know if Serena and this mermaid princess had a good relationship. "Professor, did I hear you say something about Mariana's jewel?" the princess asked him. "Yes," Professor Liechtenstein confidently answered. "I can tell you all that we humans know about it." A glint flashed across the princess' eyes. She clearly yearned for this Mariana's jewel. "All right, Professor, let us talk under. Guards, escort them to my chambers, please." Then the mermaid princess dove back down in the lake, never making a single splash. The merman guards then performed a few motions with their webbed hands, controlling the water underneath their feet with ability power. A giant bubble emerged from the water, which slowly floated towards Michael and the professor. This was how they were going to go underwater safely. As Michael and the professor entered the bubble, Michael couldn't help but ask, "Do you know her, Professor?" "No," he replied. "Then how did you know she was going to want information on this Marianas jewel?" The professor scoffed. "She's a princess. Of course she's going to want it." Seeing the look of curiosity on Michael's face, Professor Liechtenstein knew what he was going to ask. "You want to know about Marianas jewel too, right?" Michael nodded. "And the antique too. What is it about? What even is it?" Both are incredibly important pieces of history. One involves the humans, the other involves the mermen. Just like me, these mermaids search for answers as if it was their life's mission. Why, you ask? It's because solving these mysteries gives us insight into what happened in the ancient era, and how we can replicate it in the present. As Michael and Professor Liechtenstein continued their conversation, their bubble started descending down into the depths of the lake. They found themselves looking down at a sunken city made out of large coral reefs complete with a kelp sea forest. Bioluminescent clumps of algae lit up the whole lake floor, allowing mermen and fishes to swim comfortably even hundreds of feet deep underwater, where not even light could touch its surface. They've done a great job in trying to recreate Atlantis," Professor Liechtenstein commented. "But this is nowhere near as grand or as beautiful as the real thing. Since this whole territory was entirely made in only a few months' time, it was understandable that it wasn't up to the same standards as what could be seen in the ocean floor." But for Michael, this was already impressive enough. "Have you been to Atlantis, Professor?" "Yes," the professor answered proudly. "One needs to be well versed in the world, if one intends to study it. If you really want to find answers to mysteries, then traveling all over the globe will help tremendously." The professor, without knowing it, started treating Michael as if he was truly his protégé. Perhaps it was because of the talent Michael showed with deciphering the map that the professor realized that there was finally someone who he could endow his numerous bits of knowledge to. "We're here," said the merman guiding the bubble. Michael noticed that the man's mouth didn't move at all as he spoke. Yet, the voice that came out of him sounded as clear to him as if the man had been speaking right in front of him. "You'll get used to it," the professor chuckled. Mermen communicate by vibrating their voice nodules, just like how a whale or a dolphin uses clicks and whistles. Eventually, the giant bubble descended down into a giant coral reef bearing a great resemblance to a sunken ship. Michael could even see the mast broken in half, now covered in barnacles. "The princess is waiting for you inside," said the merman. The bubble automatically floated towards the giant hole in the middle of the ship, which seemed to be the point of failure that caused it to sink in the first place. Entering inside, Michael and the professor saw numerous other mermen and mermaids, all untypical of the beast folks he'd seen before. These mermen were more fish than they were human. "There's a whole city down here," Michael muttered. He saw merman children playing around in the kelp forest. He saw manatees-human hybrids carrying large rocks seemingly used for construction, and he saw freshly captured krill being served at tables with what seemed to be a restaurant meant for mermen. This was the first time he had seen mermen in their natural habitat. But as curious as he was about them, they were just as curious about him as well. As the bubble floated through a current in the water coursing across different coral homes, mermen would peek out of their holes and stare at him and the professor. "Have they not seen a human before?" he asked the professor. "They have. They just didn't expect to see one using the princess bubbles, I expect." Finally, the current of the water led them straight to an open throne room where the octopus princess sat comfortably. The bubble laid to rest right in front of her, surrounded by merman guards all around them. The octopus princess stared at the professor with an intrigued expression. "Humans aren't allowed inside the lake, you know. But for you, Professor, I can make an exception. After all, your reputation precedes you. I have heard of your great need to hoard knowledge and information like it was Sue drops." Professor Lichtenstein performed a very crude bow, where one wouldn't know if he meant it in a sarcastic way, or he was truly as awkward as it seemed. "Thank you. Now can we get to what I want?" The octopus princess chuckled. "Relax, Professor. We haven't even introduced ourselves yet. My name is Octavia, and I am the 30th princess of the Kingdom of Atlantis." Then the princess gestured for the professor to do the same. "Lichtenstein, Professor Lichtenstein." With a nudge from the professor, Michael introduced himself as well, of course, using his undercover name. "Kyo, the professor's protégé." Princess Octavia nodded in satisfaction. "Now that we've got that out of the way, Professor, can you please tell me what you know about Mariana's jewel?" The professor eyed the princess. "And you'll tell me about the antique?" The princess just smiled. A vague answer. But what could the professor do? She was the last one known to have had the antique. He had to give her what she wanted. "All right, Mariana's jewel. I know that all of you princesses have been searching for it your entire lives." Princess Octavia nodded, casually taking a plate of krill given by her attendants. "Yes, it's of utmost importance that I get it instead of my other sisters," she said, munching on the krill. "Why?" Michael sneakily asked the professor. But it seemed that the princess heard about it either way. "It's because our father promised us something from the day we were born. Give him Mariana's jewel, and he will give us his kingdom in return. Obtaining it will allow any of us to inherit all the wealth, power, and fame that an ocean king entailed. So, you can understand my obsession with Mariana's jewel." It finally made sense why Octavia caved in and let the professor inside their quadrant. It was a small price to pay compared to getting a chance to inherit the entire kingdom of Atlantis. "So, Professor, tell me what human history tells us about Mariana's jewel." If you help me obtain it, then I shall consider it with great gratitude. I will reserve a seat for you in my new kingdom, Princess Octavia promised. The professor didn't even bat an eye. He truly had no interest in matters not concerning history. Mariana's jewel is not in the ocean, the professor declared. Princess Octavia nodded. Tell me something I don't know, Professor. If the jewel was underwater, it would have been long found by my other sisters. Heck, our father wouldn't even entrust it to us. He would have searched for it himself. This means that you think that Mariana's jewel is in the surface world, the professor continued. Yes, the octopus princess nodded. That is why I'm here, Professor. It is a chance for me to find clues on the whereabouts of Mariana's jewel. And my sisters will do the same. So, I would really appreciate it if you give me a head start. The professor looked up at the princess. According to knowledge left behind by the ancient era, the Mariana's jewel is not located in the seven seas. It is not even located in the four corners of the world. Princess Octavia hung on the edge of her seat. It is found in another realm, the professor revealed. Hearing this, Princess Octavia began massaging her tentacle hair. Another realm? A pocket dimension, perhaps. It is said that Gaia herself hid the Mariana's jewel by safeguarding it in a completely different reality than the one we live in. Gaia, Michael blurted out. He didn't expect to hear her name all of a sudden. He had always thought of the Iron Maiden as someone only involved in the vampires. But as it turned out, she seemed to pop up in merman mythology as well. On the very last edges of her life, Gaia used her powers to keep it safe during the great cataclysmic event. We do not know where it ended up, but we do know that Gaia's actions saved it from destruction, even now. Michael hung on to the professor's last words. Even now? How are you sure that it's still safe even now, Professor? This time it was Princess Octavia who answered. It's because we're still alive, human kid. Michael turned to the professor, asking for his explanation. And like a good teacher, the professor answered. It is said that Mariana's jewel holds the very secret to creation. It was the very thing that started life on Earth. Princess Octavia nodded. It's what allowed us to evolve. It's what allowed the ancient humans to become the dominant beings in the world. And it is what is allowing us to continue our life even now. Without Mariana's jewel, life will cease to exist in this world, she added. Michael stayed silent for a few seconds as he digested this new information. First of all, he didn't think that a single object could hold so much weight and importance. It was scary to think that the destruction of one thing could lead to the total extinction of every life on Earth. Even he was now interested in finding this Mariana's jewel. Not because he wanted to inherit the kingdom of Atlantis, but because he wanted to safeguard it himself. Professor, does your history tell of the exact location of the Mariana's jewel? Asked the octopus princess, with a tinge of hope in her eyes. Unfortunately, the professor shook his head. To ensure the safety of Mariana's jewel, Gaia only told one other person of its location. Who? Michael and the princess both asked. She told it to her most loyal believer, a woman so devoted to Gaia that she laid down her life for her during the great cataclysmic event. Most humans simply know her as a devotee to Gaia, but the vampires know her as the original vampire, Michael muttered. The professor nodded at Michael, pleasantly surprised at his knowledge. Not many people know that, but this devotee is what started the vampire race, making them different from the other beast folks. She allowed the worship of Gaia to continue even today, even though her presence had long been reduced a wisp. If you want to find Mariana's jewel, then your best bet is to find any remnants of Gaia's religion and the original vampire. If the original vampire left behind any information about the location of Mariana's jewel, then you should first ask the royal bloods. Princess Octavia looked really pleased from the professor's words. This was information that she didn't know, and what her other sisters wouldn't know. This gave her an advantage over any of them. This is very useful information you've given me, Professor. I shall be asking a few royal bloods if they know anything, though I doubt they'd give it to me so willingly. Either way, I will divert my focus away from searching the surface of the royal continent and instead focus on pocket dimensions. After finding out that Mariana's jewel was in another realm, the princess took that to mean that it was in a hidden pocket dimension that no one had ever been in before. But of course, she had her work cut out for her. She'd be searching for millions and millions of pocket dimensions if she did it without any help. Michael, on the other hand, didn't have to bother with that. After all, according to the professor, the only other person that knew the location of the jewel was none other than the original vampire, Kuno. There was just one extremely unfortunate thing. She lost all her memories. If she couldn't even remember her own name, then of course she wouldn't remember anything about a top-secret location that, in the wrong hands, could spell the doom of the entire world. Wait, is that why she doesn't have her memories? Did she purposefully make herself have amnesia to forget the location of Mariana's jewel? Her amnesia could be about the jewel, or it could have been about a million other reasons. After all, it seemed like Kuno and Gaia had a very good relationship, seeing as how she entrusted Kuno with the secret to finding Mariana's jewel. It wouldn't be surprising if Kuno was given more secrets that were equally as world-breaking as the jewel. With such dangerous knowledge, it was only logical for Kuno to erase her memories. Either way, if he wanted to find Mariana's jewel, then he'd have to help Kuno regain her memories. Truthfully though, a part of him wanted Mariana's jewel to remain a secret. If no one knew where it was, then no one could use it to destroy all life on Earth. But his intuition told him that Mariana's jewel was important. Everything was too big of a coincidence, from him unknowingly reinstating Gaia's religion, to finding the original vampire, and to now finding out about Mariana's jewel. It felt like fate was leading him towards its discovery. But I don't have to think about this now. I promised Kuno I'm going to help her with her memories. And if one of those memories ended up being about the Mariana's jewel, then it's only then that I could make a decision on whether to find it or not. But for now, with no leads, it's useless for me to worry about such things. "Thank you, Professor," said Princess Octavia. "I have held up my end of the bargain. Now give me the antique," demanded the professor. "With how helpful you've been, Professor, I would like nothing more than to give you what you want. But unfortunately, I do not have the antique." "What?" the professor bellowed. "Now, I did have it for a brief period of time, but I have already returned it to its rightful owner," Princess Octavia said, trying to calm down the professor. But it seemed that this only made the professor become even more agitated. Being so close to his goal yet so far away was infuriating, to the point that the professor looked a little bit crazy. The antique! The antique! So close! The professor muttered, grabbing at his hair. "Truthfully, I wanted to borrow the antique because I thought it held the secret to Mariana's jewel. But it didn't, so I quickly returned it without a second thought. I had no interest in things of the surface world. But if I had known that you were going to visit me, Professor, I would have held on to it a little bit longer so that you could have had a good look at it," said Princess Octavia with pity. She seemed genuinely sorry that she couldn't help the professor. Then, with a moment of clarity, the professor turned back to the princess. "Where is it then? Who has the antique?" Princess Octavia leaned back on her seat and answered, "The Draconians, Professor. They have the antique." The professor turned silent for a moment, struggling to digest the words that came out of the princess' mouth. "The Draconians?" he doubted. Why would the Draconians want the antique? He couldn't understand it. Like Princess Octavia, the Draconians should have no business in wanting an antique that involved humans. It held no value for them except for a good mantelpiece on their tables. Purely for its exotic value? No. If it was, they would have been bragging about it to the rest of the world. Is it because they want to sell it for a high price? No. As much of a hoarder Draconians might be, they have other means to exchange to gain much more monetary value. Professor Lichtenstein began muttering out different reasons as to why the Draconians would possibly want the antique, leaving Michael and Princess Octavia to themselves. "What is the antique anyway?" he asked the princess. As brief as it was, she held the antique in her hands. Perhaps she was the only other person who knew what this antique looked like. Princess Octavia smiled at Michael. "It's a bone. A bone. Yes, a bone. Like the ones you humans have under your skin." Michael was shocked that all this time, The piece of antique they were talking about turned out to just be a piece of bone. He thought it would have been the equivalent of the Rosetta Stone with its significance. But it was just a bone. How important could it be that it could solve one of the greatest mysteries in the world? Wait, could it be a bone from an ancient human? How big is it? He asked her. As tall as me, she answered. That was one big piece of bone. If it was just one piece, then it definitely couldn't have been the bone of a human. He'd seen ancient humans from his brief hallucinogenic visit to the past thanks to the bratty goddess, and they weren't gigantic. They looked like normal humans. So it's not a bone from the ancient humans, he muttered. As soon as he said that, the professor suddenly turned his head towards him. What did you say? That it's not a bone from the ancient humans? He repeated. Professor Lichtenstein suddenly slapped his own forehead before chuckling like a maniac. Of course. How could I have been so stupid? You're right. I was so tunneled on the ancient humans that I forgot they weren't the only ones there. Professor? Michael asked. But the professor was so absorbed in his discovery that he didn't even hear Michael's words. They have no need for the antique. Unless they do. Princess Octavia. Did the Draconians say anything about heritage? The octopus princess smiled while nodding. Now you're asking the right questions, Professor. Yes, indeed. I heard them talk about the antique being their rightful heritage. The professor suddenly jumped up while pumping his fist as if he just discovered something. I knew it. Michael couldn't help but be caught out of the loop. Knew what, Professor? The antique didn't belong to the ancient humans. They belonged to the mythical beasts. Princess Octavia seemed to have understood the professor's words as well. I see. That would make sense as to why they valued the antique so much. What are the mythical beasts? Michael blurted out. Back in the ancient era, it wasn't just the ancient humans who lived on this green earth. They coexisted with the mythical beasts, an ancient extinct race of monsters that battled against the ancient humans for supremacy. Michael hadn't heard of these mythical beasts before, so it was hard for him to imagine that they were in the same time frame as the ancient humans, let alone be powerful enough to rival against them. After all, ancient humans could not only wield unity, but they could use ability powers as well. Each of them were powerhouses. How could mythical beasts even battle against the ancient humans? I thought they were the apex creatures of the world. They were, the professor answered. Ancient humans were the most powerful beings in this world. But that doesn't mean that they were invincible. Mythical beasts could still kill an ancient human, especially if they were caught off guard or without support. Mythical beasts have this unique strength which allows them to seize control of ability power and render them useless. It's been written in the history books that ancient humans must not, under any circumstances, fight these mythical beasts without their mithril artifacts because they would find themselves unable to control their own ability powers, and therefore fall prey to these monsters. In other words, mythical beasts were akin to tigers, lions, and sharks in the modern world. Although humans controlled the world with technology, had guns and weapons at their disposal, a tiger could still easily kill a human if they got ambushed. If this bone belongs to mythical beasts, then why would the Draconians need it? The professor smiled, pointing at Michael. That's the thing. They shouldn't unless the theory about the convergence of races is correct. There is evidence that suggests that all demihumans came from these mythical beasts, just like how humans came from the ancient humans. But it's never been proven and not widely accepted since there's the problem of procreation. How could beasts turn human-like? It's impossible unless they mix together with humans, but some people think that that's impossible and even crude. In this theory, the evolution path was as follows: mythical beasts, demihumans, or beast folks. There's a lot of problems with this theory. First of all, it's been proven as a fact that vampires came from the original vampire, not as a descendant of mythical beasts. Yet, they still have the same Tao heart as the rest of the beast folk. But clearly, the Draconians still believe this to be true. They believe they descended from mythical beasts. That still doesn't answer why they want the antique, Professor, Michael asked. The professor nodded at his question. Perhaps it's because they want proof of their heritage, or perhaps it's because they want to strengthen their power. If that is true, Professor, then the gap between the Draconians and the rest of the species will become even wider than it is now. They're already quite dominant as it is, said Princess Octavia with a serious look. Thankfully, the professor seemed to have woken up from his initial surprise and noticed Michael's face full of questions. Have you ever wondered why Draconians are considered the strongest, most dominant race in the entire world? It's because they have within them a much greater control of ability power than everyone else. Some might even say that it bears a great resemblance to the strength that mythical beasts have, but that's always been widely challenged. The professor and the princess continued talking about the implications of such discovery. Michael hadn't seen a Draconian himself yet, but with the way these two were talking about them, it truly did seem like the Draconians were so much more stronger than the rest of the species. The octopus princess was the one most concerned, especially because of her ambitions to have her own kingdom. Princess Octavia, guessing about theories won't get us anywhere. I have to see the antique for myself, the professor demanded. Since you borrowed it from the Draconians before, would it be possible for you to borrow it again so that I could take a look at it? The princess stayed silent for a second, her eyes going through the calculations. Seeing her hesitate, the professor promised her something in return. If you help me, I will share with you the results of my findings. This didn't interest the princess that much, seeing as her face remained stagnant. I had to pay for a lot of concessions after borrowing that antique, professor. I'm not quite sure if I can pay that again. Darn it! The professor cursed. So close. But much as the octopus princess denied it, Michael could see that she wasn't exactly negative about the idea. She just needed a little persuading. Do you want something, princess? He asked her. Princess Octavia smiled. It's so much easier dealing with someone with common sense, unlike the professor who seemed numb about anything except history. You're right. I do need something. I need some help. The professor perked up again. What is it? You see, I am not the only other royal in this lake. And as much as I would like us mermen to rely only on each other, we have to make some concessions and rely on other people. No matter how good we recreate it, this isn't Atlantis after all. We have multitudes of problems here, like the pollution in the water, the lack of diverse food, etc. We're not as familiar with the surface world, so we need the help of the humans. A lot of other merman camps have already secured their own allies in New Sparta, while I have not. This isn't ideal if I'm to be the leader of all Marin here in New Sparta. Michael stared at her. What exactly do you want us to do, princess? Princess Octavia squinted her eyes. Do you perhaps know about the Aubert Company? They recently visited the lake a few days back with their prodigy Mauricio, and we were all quite impressed by their prowess. Mauricio could be considered as one of the best youngsters in his generation. Oh, how he would have been a perfect ally. Unfortunately, I was not the one that secured their allyship. I tried, but they were quite loyal to the mammalian merman camp. It seemed that the Aubert Company and this Mauricio prodigy was truly well regarded within the New Sparta community. It made sense. They were a part of the conglomerates once upon a time. Mammalian merman camp? He asked. They're a different group of mermen that has a close resemblance to aquatic mammals like dolphins and whales, answered the professor. They're being led by your brother, correct? Yes, Princess Octavia confirmed. Now if my dear brother was able to solve the problems of our lake before I do, then he'll have the support of the majority of the mermen, making him our leader. Princess Octavia was ambitious, the complete opposite of Serena, who just liked to spend her time lounging in the nation of Reborn. Have you considered allying with other companies? Michael asked her. Yes, I have. The Mizal family has taken my interest. Perhaps you've also heard of their prodigy. His name is Pietro Mizal, said the princess. The professor was the only one who seemed familiar with the Mizal family. They're quite famous on the western coast, he said. Exactly. They seem to fit our needs the most. We need a steady supply of krill and algae, which they can provide. The only problem they can't solve is the pollution in the water, but that can be done later, said the princess. They need krill and algae? ChatJK5, does modern agriculture have solutions for those? Yes, Michael. but they will involve massive machineries that will require electricity. That's doable, he thought. Is that the only reason why you want to ally with the Mizal family? He asked the princess. The fact that they're pretty strong as well makes them a very good candidate for my ally. Their prodigy, Pietro Mizal, is the only one who can stand a chance against Mauricio Aubert. I saw him recently. He participated in the Brown Blood Swordsman tournament recently, the professor recollected, and it just so happens that Mauricio is also in the same tournament. Princess Octavia clapped her hands. Perfect. This will give a chance for Pietro to show that he's stronger than Mauricio. They're bound to end up in the finals. Oh, how exciting! Michael kept his lips sealed. As much as the princess would like to hope, he knew for a fact that Jaku would win the tournament. What I would like you to do is to help me recruit Pietro and the other Mizal family as my allies, said the princess. But just as Michael and the professor were about to speak, the giant bubble containing them shook as a gust of water burst into the throne room. A female merman with a squid-like face and a human-like body rushed inside. Princess, there's urgent news. Pietro has been knocked out of the swordsman tournament in the first round. This sudden news knocked the water out of the princess' gills. She couldn't utter a single word. Ah! Her whole plan hinged on trying to recruit the second-best prodigy that could stand a chance against the Auberts. Yet he was just knocked out in the first round. Who defeated him? She asked her hurriedly. Has he inherited Davy Jones' luck and met Mauricio in the first round? The squid mermaid attendant shook her head. Is it someone from the famous human families? No, princess. It's an unknown swordsman. And it's a demi-human. A demi-human? Her surprise was warranted. Although she tried to be unbiased, many people think that demi-humans were the unevolved versions of the beast folks. After all, they had no Dao heart, which meant that they couldn't use any ability powers. How did a demi-human defeat Pietro? He's in the second stage of body formation. We don't know, princess. The werewolves aren't saying anything. The only thing we know is that the fight ended extremely fast. Michael couldn't help but think of a dark-scaled dragonborn with a penchant for doing everything fast so that he could have more time to sleep. Only he could do something like this. Meanwhile, Princess Octavia began pondering. It's either Pietro underestimated his opponent, or that the difference in skill is just that big. A thought popped up in her head, one that told her that this demi-human held incredible skill. No, she said, denying the thought. It must have been luck. Kyo, Professor, I have a new task for you. If you can help me recruit the eventual winner of the swordsman tournament, then I will consider us even. Professor Lichtenstein looked up at her. You mean? Yes, I will contact the Draconians and ask them to lend the antique to you. You'll just have to promise me that you'll help me after you get what you want. Of course. Of course. The professor squealed. The princess then gestured for her attendant to give her a coral. Then, she began inscribing on it with her tentacles, squirting ink through her skin. Finally, she handed the conch letter to the professor. Give this to the Draconians. Contains my signature. Unfortunately, I won't be able to join you there since I have a lot of stuff that I need to handle. My sister Serena, who's been in the surface world way longer than me, is requesting a meeting. Professor Lichtenstein gleefully obtained the authorization letter and kept it hidden in his pockets. Come on, Kyo. We have discoveries to find. Michael turned towards Princess Octavia. Princess, you may want to visit the Reborn company. They may have what you need. The princess looked at him and nodded before going back to discussing with her attendant about Serena. After the meeting was done, the giant bubble soon ascended back up to the surface of the lake, with the professor still high from excitement. I can't believe it. I'll be seeing a real bone from a mythical beast. Michael had to remind the professor of their obligations. We still have to help her with recruitment. Yes, yes, the professor nodded. But it's more than likely that Mauricio will end up taking the championship in this tournament. We'll have to settle with second place. Michael shook his head. I don't think so, Professor. Maybe there's going to be a surprise, he hinted. Doubt it. Mauricio is a talented swordsman and a great magnetic. There's no one that can match him in that tournament. Would you like to bet on that, Professor? Liechtenstein looked at Michael, intrigued at the proposition. Fine. If Mauricio wins the tournament, then you'll tell me how you know about unity. And if someone else, let's say a demi-human, wins the tournament, then I want to recruit you in my company. The professor stopped and looked at Michael. Ha 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 ha. How bold. Do you know how many conglomerates have tried and failed to do that? It's a yes or no, Professor. Do you accept the bet? Without a second of hesitation, the professor said, Yes, I'll take you up on your offer. A demi-human winning against a peak second stage like Mauricio? Yeah, that's impossible. You should have bet on the other promising human geniuses. Meanwhile, back in the brown-blood werewolf tribe, Patriarch, I think we must pay attention to this demi-human, said the female werewolf. His swordsmanship is undeniable. Even the mermen are starting to take notice of it. But her words were met with a lot of skepticism. It must have been a fluke. Pietro is strong, but I sense him to be quite inexperienced. He let down his guard. That doesn't take away from the fact that this demi-human defeated the second-best prospect in the tournament, argued the female werewolf. She wanted to continue arguing, but the patriarch sitting at the front of their campfire raised his hand. Mauricio is the perfect ally for us brownbloods, said Lupin. The Auberts have connections with the Draconians. The other tribes will respect that. We can use that to our advantage and raise our standing within the tribes. And to that, the female werewolf couldn't argue. On the other side of the werewolf quadrant, Brock, Jakku, and the rest of the swordsmen were waiting on the new instructions for them in the tournament. The participants have significantly lessened after the first round. Wait, where's Pietro? I haven't seen him anywhere. Did he leave? No one could answer those questions because the only one who knew the truth was sleeping on the grass. Eventually, the werewolves came back, with their chief Lupin leading them. For the next round of the tournament, we request the swordsmen to form with your companies and teams. Your aim is to once again defeat as many targets as possible in a given amount of time. The more you defeat, the better your seeding will be in the next round of the tournament. Brock immediately tried to team with Jakku, but Jakku refused. What's the point? It's just the seeding. Last place, first place, it doesn't matter. As long as I'm the only one left standing at the end, then I've done my job. Meanwhile, Michael and the professor exited the Merman Lake, with the giant bubble immediately popping as soon as they landed on ground. Professor Liechtenstein then immediately charged out in a run, almost leaving Michael behind. You coming? He asked, with his voice almost fading. Michael chuckled and followed after the professor. He couldn't blame him. He, too, was excited about seeing the antique for himself. Mythical beasts and ancient humans intrigued him. They were headed towards the center of New Sparta, following the path of the boundary between the Merman Lake and the Werewolf Forest, towards the Draconian territory located in the inner circle. It was already nighttime, with the stars out in the sky and the full moon hanging clearly above them. It illuminated the dark streets, giving human visitors extra time to sell their wares along the boundary. Do you even know where we're going, Professor? Princess Octavia told them that the antique was held by a Draconian called Zoviru, and the professor, because of his excitement, neglected to ask her about where Zoviru was located. I'll deal with it when we get there, said the professor. I have a plan. The professor's plan seemed to only involve him running straight towards the Draconian territory. Michael didn't complain. After all, he was supposed to be the professor's loyal student, Kyo. Eventually, as they got closer to their destination, the roads got narrow, the people got lesser, and the fog seemed to have thickened past the point to become a cloud. They could barely see past a few meters ahead of them. Just then, Michael felt his senses stir. Professor, he muttered, stopping in place. The professor, albeit his hyperfixation on the antique, seemed to have noticed the visitors as well. He stopped right beside Michael and looked around the fog. Michael secretly used his drone and piloted it to fly up in the sky. Its surface perfectly mimicked the chaos of the fog, becoming part of it in an instant as the invisibility feature activated. Once above, His drone vision gave him a top-down view of the entire location, as well as the ability power signatures of their visitors watching in the fog. There were 5 of them exactly, and each of them were large, tanned, burly men wearing black-skinned fur around their shoulders. They were werewolves. The brown bloods? No, they looked different. The werewolves he saw in the tournament wore brown fur around their necks, with plenty of tattoos that seemed to indicate their standings within the brown blood tribe. These werewolves, on the other hand, wore black fur and had no tattoos on their skin. But they did wear gold earrings around their noses, ears, and lips. "Who are you?" the professor shouted. But silence replied back. Michael leaned in to the professor and whispered, "Professor, do you know of any werewolves who wear gold earrings on their body?" Professor Lichtenstein looked back at him. "The gold bloods. Why?" The professor's words were a little bit too loud, and a couple of moments later, the werewolves finally showed themselves from the fog. "It seems we underestimated you, Professor. We didn't think you'd be able to sense us." The gold-blood werewolves were very impressed with the professor, eyeing him with respect. But the professor was just looking at Michael, shocked that his words turned out to be true. "How did you?" The professor looked up at the skies, seeing the full moon above them. The werewolves were strongest tonight. All of their senses, their physical and magical, were amped up multiple times than normal, both human and wolf side. This was one of the few times in the month where the werewolves equaled that of the draconians. With the fog added, no normal human nor magnetic could sense them this easily. He looked at Michael and had one thought. Was his protégé actually a prodigy? "Professor, forgive us for our little prank. We mean no harm in stalking you," said one of the werewolves. "Let me introduce ourselves. My name is Ernest Goldblood. My father is the tribe chief of the Goldbloods." Ernest and the Goldbloods howled in a high-pitched tone, showing their goodwill to the professor and Michael. "I do not appreciate this sudden visit," said the professor sternly. "I'm in the middle of a very important task, and you're in the way. That's a shame, but my father insists on your presence, Professor," said Ernest. But Professor Lichtenstein wasn't having it. He didn't care about pretenses and walked out of the encirclement that the werewolves had them on. Michael followed behind the professor, and the werewolves let them leave. "Professor," muttered Ernest, "Father knows about the antique, and he has information that he assures you that you would like to know." Lichtenstein stopped in his tracks. The werewolves knew exactly what to say to bait the professor in. "What type of information?" the professor asked, turning around. "It's about the ancient roar," Ernest said, smiling. Michael, as usual, turned to the professor for any explanations as to what this ancient roar meant. But the professor seemed far too interested in what the werewolves had to say to notice Michael. "You better not be lying," he warned Ernest. "Professor, please, it's the full moon. We dare not anger it." Michael whispered to the professor, "Can we trust them?" Unfortunately, his words mean the truth. Leakin tradition greatly dishonors those who perform sins during a full moon. Rumors say that werewolves would lose their ability to transform if they angered the moon. The professor answered. "Then you know us well, Professor. Now, would you please follow us to the tribe?" Ernest said, gesturing for them to follow. The professor started angrily following the werewolves before signaling Michael to tag along. As they were walking, Michael couldn't help but ask, "Professor, who are the Goldbloods?" "The werewolves are separated by tribes. It's too complicated to discuss each one as the history between them is deep and familial. All you have to know is to never mention the Brownbloods in front of the Goldbloods chief. There's bad blood between them." "I never knew you could make puns, Professor." "Huh. Never mind." Eventually, the fog lessened and they saw a lively town of cabins in the midst of the forest. Houses made of dark wood were arranged in a circle, facing a giant campfire whose flames reached twice as high as the ceilings. "We've arrived just in time," said Ernest. "The lunar campfire is about to start." Ernest and the werewolves rushed towards the campfire, sprinting on all 4 of their limbs like an actual wolf. This would have been quite a sight to see any other day, but why did it have to happen when I'm so close to the antique? The professor grumbled. Then he turned to Michael and explained. The lunar campfire is their day to worship and give sacrifice to their god, the moon. They go through a lot of posturing, so don't be surprised when, before the professor could finish his words, Michael heard one of the werewolves howl to the moon. Awoo! One after another, the werewolves began to howl until the entire Gold-Blood tribe harmonized with each other into a strangely hypnotic sound. Michael suddenly felt his God-forged pieces stir. His ability power was becoming active. The howling of the werewolves was making his God-forged pieces produce more ability power. It was making him powerful. Do they have something special with those howls? He asked the professor. Not particularly. I heard it's just a motivating factor for them. Come on, said the professor. Let's speak to the tribe chief and get back to finding the antique. The professor led Michael inside the Gold-Blood tribe, squeezing themselves past the werewolves who were drinking some kind of liquid and getting drunk. Visitors, come drink and worship the moon, said one of the werewolf, handing Michael and the professor their own wooden cup. Don't take it, the professor warned. That thing is laced with wolfsbane, which is mildly toxic to the werewolves, allowing them to feel intoxicated. For normal humans, the result will be much worse. That explained why the werewolves looked a little too happy. The only thing that was missing from this was flashing colorful lights, and Michael would have thought that he was in the middle of a rave. The men and women around them were dancing, celebrating without a care in the world. They probably didn't even notice that they were just humans. Settle down, wolves. Let us give our visitors some space. They've come a long way. The crowd parted ways as an old man with plenty of gold rings in his ears limped towards them. His left leg was noticeably thinner than the right, with barely any muscle or fat inside it. Despite his disability, the old man wore the most lavish of gold earrings than the rest of the werewolves beside him. It was easy to guess that he was the chief of the Gold-Blood tribe. Welcome. I see my son has succeeded in persuading you to have a little detour into our humble abode. The professor cared not for pretenses and just went straight to the point. He promised me that you have some information that I'd like. Chief Klaus. Is that true? Or has he lied in front of the full moon? Klaus chuckled. It is true, Professor. Come inside and we'll have our discussion. They were led towards an unassuming log cabin near the raging campfire. Despite being a home for the chief, it didn't look different from any of the other cabins nearby. It wasn't extravagant either. Once inside, Michael noticed that the furnitures around them were topped with skinned fur. It made him wonder if those were from animals or their fellow werewolves. If it was the latter, then he would have to rethink how he thought about these tribes. The ancient roar. Explain, the professor demanded as soon as he sat down. Chief Klaus took his time as he limped towards the chair opposite the professor, asking for no help from his attendants. Truth be told, Professor, we've been hearing about the antique for a while now, and I also had plans to get it for myself. The professor immediately turned protective of the antique, eyeing Chief Klaus with suspicion. Ho, don't worry, Professor. I've long abandoned those wishes when I found out that the Draconians owned it. I have no intention of having a long drawn-out war with any of them, especially when I'm already so busy with the other tribes. But why would you want it? The professor asked. The same reason why the Draconians want it, Professor. It's because I believe we're the descendants of the mythical beasts. Michael found it weird that all of these strong species want so badly to be the descendants of the mythical beasts. As far as he knew, it wouldn't change anything. Thankfully, the professor asked the very same question. Why? Chief Klaus itched his bad leg. According to the rumors, the antique is not just a remnant of the past. It's also a clue on how to evolve into the future. Some say that deciphering the antique will lead its discoverers to awaken the ancient roar. The professor laughed out loud. Preposterous. Only mythical beasts could use the ancient roar. Their specialized bodies are what produces that tyrannical sound that can even dominate ability power. No modern demi-human or beast folk can reproduce it. It's physically impossible. That's the same as someone saying that they could awaken the power of unity in humans. We've long lost that power when we devolved into our current state. But Chief Klaus remained adamant. Why do you think the Draconians want it so bad, Professor? It's because they believe that as well. They want to be the one to awaken the ancient roar. Ancient roar, Michael pondered. It dominated ability power? No wonder the Draconians and the werewolves want it. Even he was tempted to get it for himself. I got a brief glimpse of the antique, Professor. It has leftover ability power that pricks anyone who holds it for their blood. What? The professor yelled. It must be testing the lineage of whoever holds it, Chief Klaus said. Only those who have a clear heritage to the mythical beast are worthy to get the treasure inside the bone. That must be it. The professor paced back and forth as he digested all of this information. The fact that the antique had that sort of security protocol meant that it truly must be hiding something worthwhile inside. The werewolves and the Draconians concluded that it probably contained the secret to the ancient roar. Why are you telling me this? The professor asked. What do you stand to gain from giving me this information? Chief Klaus shrugged. If the antique proves to be what we think it is, then a lot of people stand to gain a lot from it. Those that are allied with the Draconian Zaviru will find themselves in an extremely comfortable position. The professor was able to read in between the lines. Someone like your brother? The Gold-Blood chief's eyebrow twitched. Ahem. Yes, my brother is allied with Zaviru. And if his swordsman tournament goes as we expect, then he's also going to be allying with the Aubert Company. That will give him two very reliable allies that will give him a good chance in the All Tournament. So the brown-blood werewolf chief is his brother. As it turned out, the professor was right. There truly was bad blood between the two. I see your problem, the professor said. But do you want us to do? I will not steal the antique for you. Chief Klaus shook his head. I only want you to do what you've always wanted to do, Professor. I want you to spread the knowledge about the ancient era. The professor was confused, but Michael clearly understood what the Gold-Blood chief meant. You want to put the pressure on them, he said. Chief Klaus shot an impressed look at Michael. Yes, I don't want to give them the time to figure out how to crack the antique. By spreading this information, there's going to be other factions within New Sparta that are going to be interested in it as well, meaning I don't have to do a single thing to stop them. The professor stayed silent for a moment. What makes you think they haven't cracked it yet? Because we haven't seen the signs yet, Professor. It is said that the ancient roar will make the very ground beneath our feet shake. It will make people grasp their chests as their ability power turns rampant. And it will make the very air we breathe turn heavy for a moment to reflect a great shift in power. Meanwhile, the Brown Blood tournament was proceeding just exactly as expected. Took the whole day, but the seeding for the final part was locked in. Of course, since Jakku opted out of the test, he became dead last on the seeding. Wake up! Yelled Brock. Jakku groggily opened his eyes and looked around. What? He asked, rubbing his eyes. It's time for you to fight your next opponents. Jakku yawned and took a second of silence before he fully processed what Brock just said. Wait, did you say opponents? Yes, opponents. You'll be fighting 3 people in quick succession. Jakku just stared at Brock for a few seconds. Huh. Brock put his hands on his waist like a disappointed father. Yeah, that's what happens when you're in the last seating. Didn't you listen to the explanation? How could Jakku have listened to that when he was so busy sleeping? He also couldn't be blamed because who in their right minds would think up of a tournament this convoluted? Couldn't they have just gone with a straight single elimination bracket? Usually this would be a team game, but since you're the only person in your group, you're going to have to do all the battles yourself, explained Brock. Jakku couldn't help but grumble after hearing this. Yes, he shouldn't have been lazy, and yes, he should have listened to the tournament explanation. Now, he ended up with a lot more work than if he had just participated in the seeding battles. But Jakku just couldn't help it. There was something deep inside him that was giving him an insatiable need for sleep and relaxation. Come on, you'll have to fight now or else you'll be forfeit. You can sleep, but your company is going to be out of the competition. There were 2 sides of Jakku currently fighting inside him. One was telling him to lay down on the grass and enjoy some nice sleep while the skies are dark and the full moon is above his head. While the other part of him wanted to complete the task that Michael set out for him. As contradictory as it may seem, Jaku wanted nothing but the best for the Reborn company. He would do whatever it takes to make it succeed the way that Michael envisioned it to be. But he also wanted to sleep. So which should he do? Should he continue to lay on the grass and do nothing, or should he just pull himself by the bootstraps and defeat as much opponents as he had to so that the Reborn company would come out on top? While Jaku was having this existential crisis inside his head, unbeknownst to him, the God-forged pieces in his chest were starting to light up. He was starting to awaken his ability power. Ugh, Jaku grumbled. I just want to be lazy. As soon as he said that, a subtle earthquake spread around all the lands. Everyone within a few-mile radius of Jaku found themselves steadying their footing as the ground underneath them started to feel unstable. Did you feel that? Brock asked Jaku while clutching his chest. Brock didn't know if it was because of the sudden earthquake or what, but he felt something tighten around his chest. It felt as if his heart was being pushed with a non-negligible pressure. Not enough for concern, but enough to be noticed. The werewolves noticed it the most. With the full moon up above them, their senses were amped up to the maximum, which meant that they would feel any kind of anomaly around them. And they knew that this wasn't a simple earthquake. It didn't come from deep within the ground. It came from something on the surface, they just didn't know what. Howls echoed in the night as the brown-blood werewolves rushed to their chief's house to convene. Chief Lupin, what's happening? There's something wrong with the air. I can feel it. That's not a normal earthquake either. And when they arrived at their chief's private room, they saw him pacing back and forth with a serious look. Chief! Lupin snapped his head towards them, surprised at their presence. The chief was so caught up in his thoughts that he didn't even notice their presence at all. The fact that the chief of the werewolves was this distracted meant that something truly serious was happening right now. Finally, Chief Lupin made a decision. We must go to the Draconian's tower. Why, Chief? Lupin looked up at the moon. Because I think they cracked it. Meanwhile, in the middle of the meeting between Michael, the professor, and Chief Klaus Goldblood, they suddenly felt the ground shake underneath their feet. An earthquake? The professor asked. But Chief Klaus immediately knew that something was wrong. No, Professor. This is much worse. Michael knew that something was happening too, but he just couldn't put a name to it. There was a strange power that came with the earthquake. It was very weak and subtle, but he could feel it. It felt familiar but unfamiliar at the same time. Coo 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 coo. Harbinger laughed to himself. What is it? He asked. Clearly, his diva knew more about this situation than he did. But before Harbinger could answer, Chief Klaus suddenly howled from the top of his lungs. Immediately, Ernest and a couple of other werewolves rushed inside. What's happening? The professor asked. Didn't you feel that, Professor? The earthquake, the change in the air, that subtle feeling of someone grabbing your heart. The professor put it all together. The signs, he said. You think that the Draconians finally cracked the antique? Chief Klaus nodded. That's the only explanation. This has to be a manifestation of the ancient roar. The Goldblood werewolf chief didn't want their rivals to have this sort of power for themselves. Professor, we have to go meet with the Draconians now, Chief Klaus insisted. Yes, we are going to escort you there. I have no doubt that the other werewolf tribes noticed the signs as well. Most of them will remain neutral, but my brother will be there to celebrate the news of his allies' breakthrough. The professor nodded. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go. Chief Klaus may not be feeling good about the supposed ancient roar discovery by the Draconians, but the professor held a different opinion. This was a joyous occasion for him and the rest of the world. If this proved to be true, then this would completely revolutionize the way they thought about the ancient era. Awoo! Ernest howled at the moon, and suddenly, his body started to bend and expand as if the bone inside his body grew to twice its original size. He bent down, with his posture changing from a straight standing position to one where his torso was parallel to the ground. His hair started to grow wildly all over his body, growing thicker and longer than what was normal. Michael watched as Ernest turned into a massive gray wolf right in front of his very eyes. Seeing it up close, even he felt intimidated by their size. They looked nothing like the wolf dog breeds that were popular in his previous life. They were more akin to trucks than dogs because of how big they were.